for children in Leon County. Again, a statutory requirement that we take those into consideration as part of a needs assessment so that we are sure not to fund something twice. So I think that there are 10 members of the Children's Services Council. Each one of us probably has a different view on whether or not we should go the full millage rate. I don't know about the three of you, but I have received several phone calls from people with a strong opinion. I was privy, I don't subscribe to the Tallahassee Democrat anymore, but someone shared with me the opinion piece. And again, I think all of these opinions are really good opinions. The superintendent made a motion 2 meetings ago. Totally get where his motivation is, and it's pure. And I mean that. I think it's incredibly pure. But all 10 of us have a different view. So I think we need to make a determination as to how much we want in the final bucket in terms of grant funding. And I would just ask the three of you to consider this. No one could have predicted COVID-19. Very few people successfully predict hurricanes or tornadoes or floods.
Fire in East Point.
Or a fire. But they happen. And I think it's safe to say I may not be able to predict what it's going to look like, but there is a strong possibility that there will be an emergency that occurs in this next fiscal year. There were comments made in the first meeting regarding the speed in which the governor made his 5 appointments, and it was record. It was record speed for any governor, for any Children's Services Council, and I appreciate the governor's appointments office, being so proactive. That has an advantage in that we got started early, but if he had waited a couple months, we really wouldn't be having this discussion, because the chance of us getting a needs assessment performed and getting some sort of a procurement process out or an application process out would be very, very limited. We have kind of a couple of extra months here, and those are the months that I worry about in terms of an emergency. So we can either fully fund it, as the superintendent has offered up, fully fund it with whatever we generate rolling over to the next year, or perhaps we are fast enough and can get a grants application process out and evaluation done and those grants awarded quickly enough, or something a little less. And again, I am one vote and I have one opinion. But those are the buckets that I want us to think about, and those are the buckets that if there is public comment, I am hopeful that you guys will speak to, because we're then going to take those buckets and sort of break them down for the full board at our 2 o'clock meeting for them to consider. The final thing point I'll make before we get to the agenda is at that 2 o'clock meeting, Judge Shorstrom, you were, I think, wise enough to notice a meeting for the 22nd. In the event that we are not able to make a decision today, I have sat on a lot of boards, and oftentimes you feel pressured to vote that day. And that pressure is, you only feel the pressure because you're not ready to vote. You don't feel like you've had enough time to digest the information to make a vote. I've had enough time. I've been privy to Mr. Granger's efforts, and we sat for 3 hours sort of ripping it apart. But the other 9 of you, I don't know have. And I don't want anyone of the 10 of us to feel like, oh no, we have to make a decision today. So I appreciate the fact that the judge anticipated that we might need the 22nd. So that sort of sets the table for this meeting, and I will now entertain a motion for the approval of our agenda. Jessica,
Before you do that, we just need to note that everybody is here.
for the record, why don't we take the roll?
Good afternoon. Please announce your presence when I call your name. Commissioner Carolyn D. Cummings. Superintendent of Schools Rocky Hanna.
Present.
Mr. Paul Mitchell. Honorable Jonathan Sherstrom.
I believe we have a quorum.
Very good.
Very nice. Okay, which brings us to item 2 on the agenda, which is the approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Cummings.
I move approval of the agenda as prepared.
Second.
Terrific. Without objection, show the agenda approved, which brings us to item number 3, and that is public comment. I don't know if we have anyone who would like to make a comment. Yes, sir. You-
The last bucket, that's the contentious piece of this. I believe that all of you here know that we have a critical problem with our children in this community. I'm not going to take a lot of time to persuade you about that, but I do want to mention a few data points that I think are significant. Much of what I'll speak to, if not all, are the points that were made in Hochul Leon's report. We should all know about zip code 32304 that has the highest rate of child poverty in Florida. It is a rate that's 48%. And then in Leon County, there are 5 other zip codes with childhood poverty rates 25% or more. We have to do more in this community to give those kids a fighting chance and to get the kind of outcomes that we want to have for our children, whether they be poor or otherwise. If they enroll in a Leon County school that's a Title I school, they're 2.5 times more likely not to meet the child readiness standards. They're already off to a bad start. Behavioral problems in the schools, which I'm sure Superintendent Hanna is well familiar with. If they're African American, they're more than 4 times more likely to receive in-school suspension or to be expelled from school. "26 African American students were expelled in the 1920 school year versus 535 white students. I'm sorry, versus 5 expulsions for white students. Violence, the murder rate in this community, gun violence rate in this community is unacceptable. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there are what the city of Tallahassee calls disconnected youth, those that are no longer in school, not employed. We can do better by them, and we must do better by them. We must have children ready for school, succeed in school, move forward in life in a productive way. And for so many of our young people, that's not happening. Again, Superintendent, you know this better than I do. 2019, there were 4 Godby students and former students that were killed from gunshot in one school year. 4. These are not just numbers, these are real lives. And the council has the opportunity to do something positive about it. Mr. Mitchell, you talked about being able to roll the funds forward. It would not be prudent to spend $9.8 million in year 1. You won't know, you will not complete your needs assessment and establish your priorities in time to be able to do that. As you suggested, the council should approve the half. You did not suggest they should approve half a meal. As I would suggest to you that the full half meal should be approved. That which is unspent in year 1 should be moved forward to future years in order to respond to the critical unmet needs in this community. I believe that the council will make sure that these dollars are spent wisely. We desperately need every dollar that we can obtain in order to make a difference for our children. Thanks for hearing me out.
Does anyone have any questions for the gentleman? Thank you, by the way. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm Neil Skeen. I was just about to do that. I'm Neil Skeen. I live at 3311 Remington Run in Tallahassee. To add to the previous comment, and you know some of my position about this, if this council, not this budget committee, but if this council doesn't levy the entire half mil tax every year, you can never get that money back. You can't make it up in future years. You can give it back if for some reason you don't find a need in future years, but you can never get it back if the need exceeds your wishes. So I hope you will build that reserve. Your construct for the budget is a sound one, Mr. Chairman. That 4th group really matters, and it's the chance to pre-fund needs in future years, including a reserve for future years, for fires, for hurricanes, for COVID. And I just hope you will give all of us who approve this tax the benefit of our bargain and use it for the benefit of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, all right. Well, thank everybody for coming and making your comments. Both of you, I take them to heart. So this is kind of where rubber meets road, and you all were gracious enough to sort of hear me out to begin with, and I think the adage that the good Lord gave us, 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that ratio, is appropriate here. So I'm going to, as chair, hush up and ask the 3 of you for sort of your feeling on, if I missed a bucket, let me know. But I think really it's that 4th bucket that we're here to kind of talk about. So I would like to recognize someone if somebody has a comment. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, and thank you for all of you that are here today. You obviously, like us, care deeply about our children and the future of our community. I'm kind of confused. I mean, obviously, if the governor would have delayed or postponed, we may have missed any funding opportunity, because we would have missed the deadline to apply for this year, and which would have pushed us back a year. So we would then probably would ask the county to give us the $400,000 without the ability to raise any tax dollars for the first year. I was a little, I watched that, the trim webinar today, 2 hours of my life that I'll probably never get back, to be quite honest with you. Oof. But I was a bit confused, and I like the structure of of the buckets. I didn't know if we were really going to get into the weeds and say, okay, well, for an executive director, Mr. Granger's contract, and the next executive director, we're going to budget $200,000. I don't know how deep into the weeds we're getting for operating expenses. We're going to budget X amount. And then that fourth bucket, we can really kind of put a pin in until we figure out. We know anything above what we have to operate it will go in that fourth bucket that would then fund programs moving forward after the needs assessment is done and things like that. I obviously agree with these gentlemen that we need to raise money on the front end. And then if we see in June, July, whenever the time's appropriate, that we have monies available that are in the bank to fund those programs. I think you, to your point, and to Mr. O'Brien's point, who recommended 0.25 mils, that you both admitted that $9 million probably won't scratch the surface. We know we're going to have at least $9 million worth of needs in this community. I agree. And if we've made that concession, then to me, it only makes sense that we would raise money, as much money as we can on the front end, to then bank, to then start funding those programs. But we can put a pin in that, to me, for later. What I didn't understand about the trim meeting, they kept talking about a vote. And a vote, and the vote had to be unanimous to qualify for full funding, or so I need help maybe understanding what that part of the conversation was about the vote, what a majority vote means as opposed to a unanimous vote. And then in statute, what that says. Does it have to be a unanimous vote in order to ask for the entire 0.5? So somebody could help me understand that.
Go ahead, Ted.
So I've seen the dependent district info, which does allow for a unanimous vote. I haven't seen an independent district. I think two things for today and for the, although we'll have the general counsel on board after today's meeting, hopefully, so we'll have access to that knowledge. But the millage rate that the council is going to consider over the next two meetings is not a final approved rate. It's a rate for a tentative budget. So it's my take on it at this point, without legal counsel, that because it's not a finally adopted millage, you guys, the council can vote on anything at once until that final vote takes place, which would have to comport with the trim requirements.
Right, and there's also, I guess, a public hearing that has to be held. So there is some time in between when the budget is proposed, then you have the public hearing, then it comes back again. And so I appreciate that we have, today's the 15th, and I don't remember the exact deadline that we had to tell
We'll have to provide a tentative millage on August 4th, but the reason that for the discussion today and on the 22nd is that by ordinance and by statute, the council is required to submit to Leon County a tentative budget for the fiscal year. And that tentative budget obviously is going to be largely based on the millage that is provided for various aspects of the operation.
And how detailed does that budget have to be? Is there there's no guidelines?
There is no guideline. What Mr. Granger and I did was kind of go into the weeds and then got out of the weeds just as quickly on issues related to staff, be it an executive director and what's a reasonable salary plus benefits, support, an executive assistant for that person, whether or not there would be a program director. A lot of that is going to be dictated by the council's decision on that fourth bucket. And so we sort of pushed pause on coming up with the specific numbers, because and you're right, I'm sort of, I think at the last meeting I said, politics is the art of compromise. And I may have been lower to begin with than where I am today. And, and ultimately, I'm going to support the will of the majority. So I don't think we need to be unanimous in our decision. I'm not an attorney, I don't play one on TV, and I didn't stay at the Holiday Inn Express last night, but I am pretty familiar with independent authorities, and I don't, Children's Services Council statute may be different, but water management districts, appointed bodies that are independent taxing authorities do not have to have unanimous, it's a majority. Having said that, if the will of this board is a number that I don't agree with, I intend to ultimately ask the chair for, or I guess vice chair at that point, to see if there's somebody in the majority who would move for reconsideration and give all of the board members an opportunity to support it. Because I do think as a council, we need to have sort of a unified front, regardless. of
So
what
in my
the
mind,
position is.
one second, Commissioner, in my mind, though, I felt like it was like me running my household. I have to pay X amount for food, X amount for electricity, X amount for mortgage, X amount, and then what I have left goes in goes in my savings account to be used as I deem necessary for whatever other reasons. I would think our job would be to say, what does it cost to run the program? And then everything above that would be put in a bank account that could potentially be spent on grants or programs or however we set it up.
Yeah, and that's probably true. That fourth bucket, though, is it's really a matter of how much are you going to earn. So.
But do we need to go back to the entire group and say, we think as a budget committee, it's going to cost $1 million to run our household or to run the program,
Right.
and anything in addition? Do we need to be that detailed? I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Well, no, Mr. Chairman, no, it was my opinion that today we would be looking at some budgetary items, maybe, some general items to make some proposals to the full council body, including projection on needs assessment, permanent director, staff, location for staff, whether it's rental or purchase or what have you. And then some projection on services for the children. I don't think we can exclude, or we should exclude services for children 2021, 2022. I mean, we have a mandate, in my opinion, as council members. Our children are in crisis, and COVID brought on extra stress on that already existing crisis. I think the taxpayers have spoken. There were so many studies done. I've read the studies. I've read what many of the nonprofits came before the council and told Judge Surstrom and Superintendent Hannah about the gaps in the services that they were providing. I mean, there are gaps in every service provider's opinion. Now, I know that's not the needs assessment, but we know that there are needs in the community. And I think it's incumbent upon us as council members to do what we can to, number one, propose a budget, adopt a budget that includes some level of services to the children as soon as possible, okay? I don't know how long a needs assessment will take. I don't know if it's projected 2 months, 3 months, but if we don't receive funding until the end of the quarter, if we did an RFP now for a needs assessment, by the time we start receiving funding, we would have that needs assessment. And we could provide some level of services to our children, in my opinion, this year. And I think it would be a disservice to wait until next year. I think we need to jump right on it. We need to try to close some of those gaps that we know exist in our communities with our children.
So let me respond to the question about the unanimous vote. I heard something about that too. I went to one of the web seminars, and I asked a question in my ignorance. I believe if they weren't on mute, I would have been laughed down at my question. There are so many different kinds of these funding entities, and there are so many funding entities that are at different stages, and the rules are not the same for all of them. I think the unanimous vote that they're talking about does not apply to the CSCs. And there were several times when I was unclear. I know Mr. Granger has a relationship with the person that ran that, and has spent time with the person that ran that, so maybe we can ask Ted to run that to ground, because I'll be perfectly candid, my biggest fear right now is that my eyes were big in that webinar because it's so complicated and so technical, and my biggest fear is that this all becomes a moot point because we screw it up. So I would ask Ted to find out if we have to have a unanimous vote on something at some point. Can you run that to ground for us?
Yes, I'll try to find that out before the 2 o'clock meeting. Yes, I will.
All right, excellent.
And
Thank you.
if I may add this as well, I went through that trim training as well, and it wasn't my understanding from any of the presentations that were done that there had to be unanimous vote on anything.
I don't think so. And then the other thing, are we, Paul, Ted, so we're not going to get a written budget today, is that right?
Yeah, so
We're
just.
not? We're not?
No, so here's what I would say to you. Those buckets, there are some specific numbers. If you take, the full millage rate of 0.5 and you divide by 12, that becomes your 13th month that Mr. Sox had recommended. So that is a bucket, and that is around I think it's $840,000, something close to that. You'll have a bucket that is the 5%. Again, that's $490,000. So sort of just starting, you've already got 2 buckets where you know precisely what the number is.
But how do you get to the percentage if you don't know the total?
Right, what you divide it by.
Yeah, you set the millage based on, you kind of back into it. Now, you can say, I don't really care what the budget says. Every other penny that the voters have allowed us, didn't direct us, but authorized us to raise, is money we would like to spend, which I think is your position. So you can just say, I've already made up my mind. I want the full millage, and what both the gentlemen were commenting on is you don't have to use it this year. You can use it over the course of the 10 years that the council has authorized. My argument is that I sort of plan on voting for the full millage rate once we start. Yeah, that is my plan. And if you take 10 years of it, you say to the taxpayers, thank you very much for $100 million, or is it $96 million over 10 years, with the hopes that they'll look back and say, you know what? They were responsible with our money, with money from the money that flows into this council comes from property owners. Those property owners are currently receiving government funds for mortgage assistance. And if you haven't seen the numbers in Leon County, I encourage you to do so. We're asking for money from those people. They have to give it, whether they like it or not, if we choose to do this. In a year that, for many Leon County residents, it's not been a great year. There is nothing about, I voted for this because exactly what these 2 gentlemen, and Mr. Hanna, your points, our kids desperately need it. There's no doubt. But just because there's a need and we have we have sort of the authority to do it doesn't mean, at least in my opinion, that we should. Having said that, though, I intend to, I want a unified front, regardless of what the position is. Commissioner Cummings.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mitchell, so as far as the budget is concerned, then what are you proposing and when are you proposing that we have it in writing? Are you proposing executive director?
Yeah, so Ted did a, here's my proposal. My proposal is we are in the middle of fiscal year 2021, 2020, 2021. We will complete that year on September 30th. That the council look to approve both a budget for our first year, which is this mini year, combined with a budget for 21, 22. And this sort of gets to your point, Commissioner, funding programs for kids. Again, something I'm very supportive of. It's really a matter of we can't build a budget with administrative costs built in until we hear sort of the will of the council. If the will of the council is to go with the full millage rate, $10 million, then it makes sense to hire staff that will administer those funds and essentially audit to make sure we're getting what we paid for.
But it's my understanding that we have a deadline to submit a proposed budget to the county. I believe the statute says, and I thought that's what we were working on. We were gonna work on.
Well, so did I, but so we have 2 meetings to do it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I just felt, as Ted and I was going through this, I'm like, I'm one vote. I mean, that's why I wanted to sort of say, these 3 buckets, we've sort of already voted on Mr. Sox's 13th month bucket. The only buckets that are going to change are bucket 4, the programs, and whether or not we want all of the money. As one of the speakers pointed out, it would be irresponsible to spend all of it in this year because we won't know. So do you want to collect it? And if you do, how much?
Well, one of the things that that sort of surprised me when I went through that trim training, and I don't know if anybody else did the seminar, they seem to suggest you establish your millage first and do your budget. Did anybody pick up on that? You didn't. And I said, that's sort of strange. But one of the speakers actually said that, because I made a note.
And I think all 4 of us sort of have the advantage of knowing the max that we can collect.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think it's sort of a little bit of a chicken and the egg, which came from who cares? We got a chicken, we got eggs. So we've got a millage rate that we know we can't exceed, and we have needs that's really where at least my thoughts are, our focus should be is what are the pressing needs?
So Paul, is the idea that operational expenses will be different for a $4 million organization than it will be for an almost $10 million organization?
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yes.
So that we can't really come up with, so there's probably got to be a minimum organizational expense. If the expense is get through trim, do a needs assessment, hire counsel, hire accountant, and nothing else, that's one thing. That's sort of a bare minimum budget. And then the rest of it, how much staff do you need? How much programmatic staff do you need? Depends on how many contracts you're going to let and how big they are. Is that the idea?
But I don't know, Judge Surser, it seems like we are doubling our work. Why would we need a bifurcated process?
I think that,
You know.
I think the answer, I think there's, if I'm following I'm thinking about this, and I don't know that I'm thinking about this correctly. Because we've got to do an interim budget for the county. And the interim budget is a good faith budget, but we're not ultimately bound by it.
Right. Mhm.
But yes, you are exactly right. Yeah, we're going to end up doing our work twice. You are exactly right. In a sense.
We are going to be doing it, I hope, not fully twice, that it's going to, that after today's meeting, we're going to have a really good feel as to what the will of the council is. And here's the nice thing, and I think it will please everyone, the fiscal hawks and others, that if we build in, Mr. Granger had an executive director, essentially 2 program directors, and an executive assistant. Okay, so a staff of 4 in the first year. It's pretty easy to get a flavor as to what those 3 salaries are. In our first meeting, there was an executive director salary for the other children's services councils around the state. And if you just kind of went on that, I think the low was somewhere around 85 or 90. I can't remember the numbers now. The high was about 130. So if you just say to yourself, well, let's kind of, zoom into the middle. And you begin remembering that this is the Children's Services Council and not the Adults Looking for a Job Services Council. But you zero in on those 3. Again, all 3 of which have to be advertised. And come one, come all in the community. None of them are determined yet, but we kind of have a flavor as to what type of person would be a good program director. Somebody who, we can go to the Department of Education. The Department of Education, I think, has many program directors, so you can get a flavor for what those salaries are. And you just take those salaries, add 30% for benefits, which would be kind of on the high end, but just rounding up, and you put that into that first bucket. That's the only part of the first bucket that changes, is that administrative cost.
Well, let me ask you this. Is not a needs assessment part of that first bucket?
Yes,
I think
ma'am.
it should be.
It is. It is.
Okay.
And again, I shared with Mr. Granger, I represent a company that does needs assessments and has done them for councils like the Children's Services Council. They know that they are excluded from being able to bid on this, as are all of my clients. However, I was able to get sort of a back of the napkin idea as to how much a needs assessment would be. And it really depends on how much you want to put in. But a global organization like Ernst & Young, EY guessed it would be as low as 200,000 and maybe as high as 300,000. So let's just say, much like salaries, we sort of built into the budget the high end, the 300,000. The nice thing is that after we competitively bid these procurements, obviously we're going to do our best to negotiate a lower price. Whatever we don't use can be put into programs, much like whatever we don't use for salary and benefits goes into to programs.
Well, do we have a sense of how long the needs assessments take?
A good question. The needs assessment that I actually looked at that was done for Orange County, which was not especially, it wasn't that it was bad, it approached it a little bit differently, and it was a needs assessment to determine whether or not they were going to establish the Children's Services Council. So it's probably not fair to use it. What the folks at EY said is if you wanted to microwave it as quickly as possible, short end is 90 days. the high end could go as much as 180 days. Again, it really depends on how wide of a reach you want and how deep you want to go. The only thing that we're required to do is a needs assessment and an evaluation of the current programs that are currently serving children in Tallahassee and look for the gaps. That is a requirement.
Right.
So I think that it would be ambitious to say 90 days. I also don't think it will take the full 180 days. So somewhere in between.
But we have to make a decision about an RFP for those services, as well as advertising for staff to assist the interim executive director, that type of thing.
Yes, ma'am. The one good thing is, Mr. Trainer, I'll let you after Mike. One good thing is that we can do an ITN. We can certainly piggyback on the state's procurement system, and there are a lot of very qualified, nearly as qualified as my client, but really qualified vendors out there who can do this, and we can go off state term contract and do an invitation to negotiate with 3, 4, 5, however many we want, but DMS can give us that list, and we can send them to them with a request for proposals and pricing. Mr. Hannah.
So remind me again, buckets 2 and 3?
Sure. Bucket 2 is the 5%.
Which could be anywhere from $450,000 if we do the entire 0.5 back to whatever
Yeah,
point, whatever 5% is
That's
of
the mandatory.
the revenue.
5%.
Right, except that
Okay.
where I came up with those numbers was the full millage rate, again, wanting more cushion, not less. The nice thing is that if the will of the council is to go with the full millage rate, it's in there. If the will of the council is to go with 0.25, it's still in there.
Then it's 220. Are you saying
No,
you
it
put the whole
stays the same. I put the whole-
450?
yeah.
Okay, and what was number 3?
Number 3 was the 13th month,
The 13th month.
right?
What's the what?
So
Which is also based on 1/12 of the full millage rate.
So I'm not sure what I really expected today. I think that we were actually going to get in the weeds and have a proposed budget with the interim director, the coming director, administrative staff, because the other thing, if you do 0.25, the percentage of your administrative overhead is going to be very high as compared to 10 million. So if your overhead, your administrative overhead, your costs, your organizational costs, I don't know how much they're different between $5 million budget and a $10 million budget. You seem to believe you start at 10 and then back into developing staff for 10 million as opposed to 5 million, that it would be different. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. But I know this, you're a very smart man. I know also with boards, there are a lot of A-type personalities. I manage 5 school board members, all with very strong opinions on how to do things. But at the end of the day, I think the final discussion is about bucket 4. But I would be happy, a couple of things. One, we're prepared to offer space and rent free of charge, because I think at Wesson in South City, I have a facility there that we can house Mr. Granger and whoever Mr. Granger's replacement is and the administrative staff. So you can take that cost out of the budget. And I think it fits perfect with that location and sends a clear message to what our objectives are. Having said that, then I think at some point people are going to want to see, or committee's going to want to see, how much do we expect to spend in legal fees? How much do we expect to spend on the needs assessment, $300,000, the executive director? And then we map all that out. Let's say that's $1 million. Then what is the end number? Does that make any sense?
It does,
And we don't have to necessarily, we obviously aren't prepared to do that today. But I think at our next meeting, whether it's on the 22nd or whatever, we need to have that we can present to them to say, this is a guess, a ballpark. We're always going to be a little high because we don't want to under budget what we think these things are going to cost. Because I'm sure there's going to be things that we don't think of, things that we're missing.
If you remember at the last meeting, of the 9 members who were there, each sort of voiced a different opinion as to, or hinted at a different opinion as to where they were in terms of the millage rate, which is, to Commissioner Cummings' point, which comes first? I don't know which comes first. But everybody had sort of a different view, and it was based on, Mr. Granger had thrown out the amount of money that would be raised based on point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 5. And you could sort of hear where people were heading. Now, there was no vote, but we were at a little bit of a loss as to, hey, could you give us a better flavor?
The other thing, I think, didn't we give someone a homework assignment? What was the young lady's name that we asked to come back with information
Yes.
about other CSCs in the state? And I think there were two things two questions that we posed to her. I know one was about what other councils had done in the first year. And do you think will she be there today?
I think she said she couldn't be here today, but could on the 22nd. Yeah.
If I might, a couple of things. She did get me the information, and Liza, I've provided it to Liza, who requested it, and I will ask her to bring copies to the meeting for everyone. Number one. Number two, I left a message for Brooke this morning about the office space and let her know that my successor would be looking into it. A couple of things about the budget that I think might help inform the conversation is that we aren't going to be using office space during the interim budget here before the fiscal year budget kicks in.
Who will be using what?
We will not be using office space.
Oh.
Our employees will be working from home so that we can use the $400,000 loan that the county has provided us more fully to do the things we need to do, like the $300,000 for the needs assessment, et cetera. When that budget ends and the fiscal year budget where we get millage kicks in, the timeline appears to be, in terms of the needs assessment and funding, that we figure out at the July meeting, we'll hopefully put an ITN on the table that the council can consider. We'll be running it through the needs assessment committee before then. We'll put that ITN out, and this is all just projected at this point. We'll put the ITN out, have a month or so for responses, whatever the requirement is, have a month or so to pick and select the right and negotiate with the right company, which puts us into the late fall, early winter. And then we have a 2 to maybe 4 month period for the needs assessment to get done, which puts us in position to begin funding services perhaps as early as April, perhaps not by July, depending on time frame. What the budget that the treasurer and I spoke about is kind of ramping up the funding for programs. And this is a trend that helps both providers, and it will help to reduce some of the burden on staff so they can work on more things, fewer of them, is instead of a single year funding period for providers, have a 2-year funding schedule. So that if we're able to begin funding services middle of next year, that first cohort of funders would get, or fundees would get, a 1.5 year contract. And then the following year, we'd start 2 years. So half of the providers, give or take, would be up every other year. And so we would have to have some money in the budget for this first fiscal year to fund a level of programs that would be acceptable to the council.
For our purpose today, though, the meeting today, the main council meeting today, we essentially got to get a philosophical vote, and then between then and our next meeting on the 22nd, we'll have an actual interim budget to vote on.
Yeah, and the other thing, to Ted's point, that I would remind everybody is, as you're going through the timeline, recognize that we're going to be doing this exact process with some historical perspective this time next year. And so this process is as kind of awkward as it is and feeling like you're doing it twice, Commissioner Cummings, next year is going to be so much easier because we'll have a year of perspective. We'll also have the results of the needs assessment. At that point, we'll have a full-time executive director on board. I mean, everything starts to make a little more sense. It's like any organization, your first year of getting up and running is just a little awkward.
Can I just ask a question just to see the notion of everyone? I know the statute says immediately we do X, Y, Z and make a report once we determine the needs assessment. Is it our position and our scrutinization of the statute that we cannot provide any services until we have the needs assessment? Is that everybody? I mean, the statute specifically does not say that now.
That's true.
But I'm saying, is that our interpretation, that we can't provide any services for the children, even though we know there are some gaps here and there? We can't supplant. The statute's clear on that, but are we saying we're gonna sit here until we?
That has not been my view of it.
Okay.
That has not been my view of it, but I don't know if.
And I
anybody
can't
else
remember
has-
who was it from Alachua County, who was it that came? I think they funded a program right out of the gate that to me
Okay.
set the tone for everything, was the visits to the new mother, the visiting nurses,
Right.
which set the tone at
Right.
birth, you know?
Right, it was an existing
Right.
program that they were able to fund.
And I guess my point is, I know it's a lot that we have to do getting off the ground. It's a lot of what we call bureaucracy and what have you. But in the meantime, citizens have said our children need assistance, they need help, and we're gonna pay this through our property taxes to assist our children. I just don't wanna wait a year or 6 months before we identify and provide some type of service.
Mr. Chair, if I might, the statute, neither the statute nor the ordinance preclude the council from immediately funding services. The nurse family home visiting that they did in Alachua was a continuation program that they'd already had funding for, and the metrics were set. What I think precludes the council from funding services earlier than the timeline is that parallel to the needs assessment going on and the council deciding on its priorities, its priority areas, et cetera, is the creation of a data system, a financial tracking system, a procurement system, a grant process system, getting the providers up to speed on how to input their information into the data system, because I believe from what I've heard from the council has no appetite for funding services until the data systems are in place to ensure that the outcomes are generated and the providers are, the services are provided as intended by the taxpayer.
Right. And I think we can generate or secure a procurement system, but I think if out of the gate we fund some programs, we can have metrics in place for those specific programs. And I think when we go in mass and we look at the needs and we try to fill those gaps, in my opinion, that's where we would need that procurement system. But I think just right out of the gate, if there are certain needs that we want to address right now, we set up the metrics. You know, the executive director, we set up the metrics, the measurement tools to do that.
So herein lies the dilemma that Ted and I found ourselves in during our 3-hour meeting of putting together a budget, scrapping it, going back, scrapping it. Herein lies that dilemma we had. I think the statute is clear about the needs assessment. Commissioner Cummings, I think your point is also well taken, and that is that this community and the children in this community have needs. We know it today. To the gentleman's point earlier, we know there are needs. But we also need the council to have the benefit of a needs assessment so that we can prioritize, because by the way, there are plenty of needs to go around. So I would feel, a little bit at a disadvantage because whatever the need is, let's just say it's hunger. If somebody came to me and said, there are children in this community that are going hungry, I'd say, that's a need, let's fund it. I mean, why would you not? Children are hungry. But if we don't have a priority where hunger is maybe number 3 on the list, maybe it's number 1 on the list that we have established, then we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants, which is why I think the statute does insist on the needs assessment.
No.
So that's, I look,
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I've said this at our first meeting, $10 million may sound like a lot of money,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of needs. And when you have a lot of people reaching in the cookie jar, that $10 million, you pull out a crumb, you don't even get a cookie. So we have to be very targeted and very focused on where are the needs, where are the gaps, and then where are our resources best served.
and the will of the 10 of us prioritizing what those needs are, because to one person, whatever the needs are, if there are 100 needs, we're not going to be able to tackle all 100. So
Right.
what's the will of the council in terms of prioritizing those? But until we have a needs assessment, I'm not sure that we can set the priorities.
I don't disagree. However, I don't think it's prohibited. I think we can prioritize based on what the needs assessment, the conclusion that we get from the needs assessment that says this is the biggest gaps, this is the biggest need. But I don't think that would inhibit us from addressing some known needs right now. Once we have the funding. I mean, I don't. I think we can do both.
Right. And it's, again, just one vote. The part of the reason I sort of staked out that middle ground is I think it covers the first 3 buckets,
Right.
and it leaves enough in bucket 4 to
Right.
address immediate needs and the potential for emergency needs.
I
And
see. It's your
enough in
buckets.
that bucket that's got the extra month in it,
Mhm.
that if we should ever need that money, it isn't like it's a requirement that we have it for the extra month. We're just doing it because I thought that and it's a recommendation from me, the whole council gets to vote on that, but I thought it was such a really brilliant idea of Mr. Sachs to think about that ahead of time, so.
All right, so we've had our budget discussion at the June 15 meeting, which is, should we move on to the agenda?
Yes, so so thank you all. So yes, item 5 is the next meeting date, which will be the 22nd of June, same time, same back channel, if that works for all members,
June
22nd.
at 12:45.
June 22nd.
And Mr. Granger, have we decided where the next,
The next meeting is scheduled for the commission chambers.
very good. So, anybody,
Mr. Chair, I have it at 2:00. So did you say?
you have the board meeting at 2
Oh,
o'clock.
you were talking about.
This will be the budget committee at 12:45. Is that,
I'll just have to change something, that's all.
are you, okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Because we could do it earlier in the
No,
morning if you.
12,
prefer.
that's fine.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
Mr. Hannah, is that work for you? Okay. John? Okay.
Did
All
y'all,
right.
did y'all need our meeting room, or you said back in the chamber, or do you need our school board room?
I think it's at the
At the county
commission
chamber,
meeting room.
Commission chamber.
Okay.
commission chamber.
And the next agenda the agenda for the next meeting is going to look identical to this agenda.
I
So,
would, maybe we could say approve and recommend a budget to the council?
yes.
interim budget.
Well, it's technically, it's the interim budget,
This will be the interim budget.
right,
This is the county interim budget to the county.
to the county. And I think item 7 is member comment. I'm only looking at you because,
We mostly met.
Because I comment often, or are you looking at me?
no, I was starting to
No,
my
I'm-
left and moving right.
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Hanna. All right, well, without objection, we are adjourned.
Excellent, thank you, well done. Chairman, thank you. All right, so 5 minutes from now, we'll start the council meeting.
Just want you to know, I've been involved in some research reports. You're not done in 2 months.
I didn't think so.
Three, two.
Walt? Yes. You shared the meal? That's awesome. I appreciate that very, very much. Well, he came to all the meetings. The guy has no time. He came to all the planning meetings. Razor's the best. Where is he? All right.
Good to see you. I heard you were involved in this group here.
Hard to believe. I thought I would never be the member of any organization that would have.
Okay, Judge, I'm going to move to the other side of you.
All right.
Actually, you know what? It might just be better to ask.
Hey, sir. John, sure, sir. I'm Carl. Oh, nice to meet you. How are you? So, where's Jessica? She just walked out the back, but you will get to speak. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. Whether you have a card or not. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. Thank you. So here's the agenda. I'll give you a whole agenda package. The one you probably want to speak to is the CSC. Yeah, and I know Jessica Taylor Goodman is the person who's supposed to be collecting the card. I'll tell you two things. You can give me the card and I'll lose it. But she was here moments ago. But either way, you're going to get to talk because I'm not going to stop this on the talk. So it's row one. So then we
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, man. Good.
appreciate you. Thanks so much.
So are you ready to call things to order?
Yes,
Should we
sir.
give
Yes,
folks
sir.
a little bit more time?
Jason.
Okay.
Thank you very much. appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. All right, yeah, we're ready to get started.
Dr. Blaylock is here, and
Is it Blaylock or Baylock?
it's Baylock,
All right,
and Murdoch is not going to be there.
perfect, perfect, perfect. All right. All right, thank you all so much for coming out to this meeting of the Children's Services Council. We're starting late, which I'm opposed to. I apologize. I blame myself. But I'd like to call us to order, and I'd ask that we recognize Ms. Jessica Goodman Taylor for the roll call.
Present.
Present.
Present?
Present.
Present.
Here.
All right, so it does appear that we have a quorum. First, next item on the agenda is Dr. Scott Baylog to give us a welcome to this beautiful facility and for us to acknowledge our gratitude for providing this beautiful facility. He gets his own microphone.
Well, welcome. We are certainly glad that all of you are here today for this very worthwhile endeavor to support the future of our community. My name is Scott Baylog, and I'm privileged to serve as Executive Director for the TCC Center for Innovation, where we are supporting the future of education and work here in the Tallahassee community. That includes facilitating innovation within and across nonprofit, for-profit, education, and government sectors, bringing organizations into this space much like your own. Over the last 3 years, we've grown from hosting 6 to 26. And so we're excited about the trajectory of the center, where we're headed, and again, hosting activities like this. So glad that you are here. We look to our friends like the Florida Chamber that have developed a scorecard where they point to preparedness for kindergarten and reading levels at the 3rd grade level. These are predictors of prosperity. And know that you have an invested partner that is eager to support your work. So we are glad that you are here today, and we are invested, and know that you can count on TCC to support this endeavor.
Thank you so much. I'm a proud graduate of Okaloosa Walton Junior College, so I very much appreciate the work of the community college.
And, you know, before I leave the podium, you know, we're already hosting activities supporting this next generation of workers and talent in the Tallahassee community. So weekly, we host area youth as young as middle school in learning how to code and building robots here in the space in partnership with Tally Robotics and FIRST. We also, if you came by during session, we collaborated with the Children's Forum and Children's Week, where we hosted the display of the hands, celebrating the works of art produced by over 10,000 children from across the state of Florida. So as I mentioned, we are invested and we are eager to support this endeavor. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for hosting us. Next item, approval of the agenda. Any,
Mr. Chair, I'll move the approval of the agenda.
approval's been moved
Second.
and seconded. Any discussion? Discussion of the agenda? Discussion of the agenda? Any objection to the agenda? Seeing no objection, we'll show that the agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes from the June 2nd, 2021 meeting, which have been circulated by Ms. Goodman Taylor.
I'll move approval of the minutes from the June 2nd meeting.
Minutes moved.
Second.
Minutes seconded. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Superintendent Hannah. Discussion of the minutes, corrections. Thank you very much. Excellent. And seeing no discussion of the minutes, we'll show the minutes approved as submitted. Next up is public comment. We got quite a few people to put in speaker cards. We're glad you're here. We're happy to hear from you. We're pressed for time, so I'll just ask that everyone limit their comments 3 minutes. And if you would identify yourself, where you're from, what makes you interested in the work of the council, and then tell us your comments. Do we have some speaker cards, Ms. Goodman Taylor? Dr. Jackson is recognized. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I want to lower that in a minute, I'm certain. 3 minutes. Erwin Jackson, I have no interest personally. I won't get any money out of this. I don't have a program I'm funding, and I would encourage everyone who does speak to share if you have any financial connections, hope to get funding from this program, et cetera. So then that'll help all of us understand the position you may be taking. I have an administrative point I want to bring out. You just approved the agenda. Let me tell you what's wrong with the agenda. I got this the other day, and I thought, great, we're meeting today, Wednesday, June 15th. And I thought, wait a minute, I looked at the calendar, Wednesday, June 15th? Well, I didn't know I was going to come tomorrow. But then luckily, I started calling around because it's either got to be Tuesday or it's got to be Wednesday, and it's either the 15th or the 16th. Now, this is an educational, well-educated people. You're asking for the public's input, and the public shouldn't have to work this hard. And if I had a more negative view, I think I would be misled to keep attendance down. But hopefully that's not the case. Secondly, I said, well, let me just call them. All you do is call them. They didn't put their phone number on here either. So that's why I wonder how much input. I think everyone wants to hear what I would say, but that's just my personal opinion, okay? So I don't think, to be fair to everyone, no decision should be made today because this was not properly notified. I know several people who wanted to be here, made arrangements, but they made arrangements for the wrong day. So, for your consideration. I am a PhD psychologist. For 10 years, I would do program evaluation for the state, privately, as a private contractor. And one thing that we learned is every program person feels their program is great, send me the money and let us start spending it. Well, what we always would say is stop. You have to have a needs assessment. The fact that you know someone who needs help doesn't mean it's a community problem. We have to have a needs assessment first. Then we have to identify all the programs that currently exist. Second, we need to do an assessment, look at existing data to see what of those programs are of no value, are wasteful. We need to eliminate them. And once you do that, then you can go ahead and say, what do we really need and what do we have to find funding for? The idea, and from a little bit from the budget committee, everyone is anxious to send me the money. I voted against this program. I think there's probably definitely some needs in this community, but we have to find out the needs and say, give us $10 million so we can get started. I read an article in the Democrat by a Neil Skeeney, something. Anyway, I don't know who that person is. He may be up here. But the bottom line, it was send us the money now, we'll figure out what to do with it later. That's always the philosophy, and it's never the best philosophy. Do a real needs assessment, and I do an identification of the programs and find out what's a waste of money now, and then let's see how we can deal with problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments and for correcting me. The lead was a proper lead. The notice was proper, even though we had error in the area. So just for responding to that.
So that allow votes to continue even though the public wasn't notified?
The public was notified, and my view of it is yes, we're allowed to make decisions today based on.
That's what's the problem.
No. The actual public notice was correct. All right, so, go ahead.
I'll give you this. I mean, this is going to take my time, and this is sent to me by your office or this board, and it has their own date, and it has their own day. And to go ahead and say, we're going to make decisions now, even though the public wasn't noticed, I think it's a bad way to start.
Thanks so much. All right, our next card, speaker card.
Mr. Michael Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, thank you, folks, for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate you, and I'll try to be quick. As a matter of fact, I spoke with Ms. Striplin on the way in the door. Didn't know her, met her coming right in. So if that's a conflict, I open it, let it go right there. My second conflict is I used to work for Mr. Paul Mitchell over there at DFS a long, long time ago. I don't think that's a conflict either. I'm here mostly, I think that the word I used with Ms. Striplin was efficiency. I'd like to see the opening of this program now that we've got it. I'll use the word lean and efficient. Start the first year. Mr. Mitchell said, it's up and running year, and this is the time to just get things in order, identify needs. There's needs all over the place. I raised 7 children with my wife, and we recognize that you've got so much. You have to do with what you got, and then a lot of things just don't get done. So you identify and prioritize. And otherwise, I have no conflicts as far as not receiving any money from the board or anything. But I am very much interested in our children in Leon County, again, not just because I had a bunch of them, but also because we've had a recent experience in my family with a child who was a very disadvantaged child in the system. So much so that my wife and I just last night, we completed our first part of our section to become volunteer guardian ad litems. We're going to join that and do that because this community, as all communities, need a lot of help. Our kids have really suffered lately, and so we like to see that. So we would like to see the programs that we do have inventoried, looked at real good. The ones that are good, put as much stuff as we can behind them to do it. The ones that don't make it, just move them along or improve them, one or the other, whichever it takes. But efficiency, and like I said, I'd like to see that first year, try to be as lean as possible because it's just as a good start. It's a good way to look at the community, know that you're serious about doing business, doing it efficiently, and doing the best we can with every dollar we have for the kids and use it correctly and properly. Thank you for your time, folks.
Mr. John Lester.
Thank you. I recognize you too. My name is John Lester. I live in Tallahassee at 2752 West Hannon Hill Drive. And I only am here to encourage you to not go overboard with your first assessment, that you try to curtail the enthusiasm for taxation and just deal with the startup needs, just as if you were a business. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Ricky Christ Castrina.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's Ricky Kleist, a very difficult name to say. I'd like to start by thanking all of you. I know and appreciate all your efforts to manage and support our community. You have a tough and complex job, and I'm sure at times you must feel like you're trying to manage a gaggle of cats. I also want to thank the participants. I think it's hugely important to our community that people become personally involved. So thank you for coming. I have followed most of the information available about the Children's Services Council, and I do not support the tax increase. If you were to go to your boss and say, I need money for a project, your boss is going to say, well, what is this project? And when you say, well, I'm not sure yet, but I know I need it, will he give you the money? If you have children and your child comes to you and says, I need more allowance, what are you going to say? Why? What do you need it for? And the child says, well, I'm not sure, but I just need it. Are you going to give them that money? If you go to a bank and request a loan, and when asked, why do you need this money? Your answer is, I'm not sure yet, but I know I'll need it. Is the bank going to give you the loan? These are real world examples. The boss, the parent, the banker will all use common sense, experience, and wisdom. If there is no plan, if there is no process, if there are no quantifiable results, they will say no. As a taxpayer, I help provide the money that you're talking about using. I call on you to just say no.
Thanks so much, ma'am. Our next speaker.
Terry Madigan.
Mr. Madigan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Terry Madigan, 1052 Summerbrook Drive, Tallahassee, Florida. I just want to thank members of the council for what you're doing. I know a number of you personally or know of you, and I know there's probably going to be some thankless work involved here. Having been on some committees in the past myself, I understand, and I don't want to be repetitive, but the lady who just spoke to you, I share the similar concerns. We need to target exactly what you're going to do with this money before you go out and tax people to raise it. I mean, there's no question in my mind that we could raise millions and millions of dollars and find something to spend it on and say it's for the children. We already spend millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in the community on children. We have 150 different organizations that supposedly service children. I had reservations about this council to start with, not because I'm against children. I have had 3 of them myself and went through the public school system, Mr. Hanna, superintendent, and good education. But we know, I think all of you know, you can't just throw money at a problem and expect to cure it. You've been given a task to really study things, to come up as to where you can make a difference and to try to weave between the various programs that are out there, not duplicate it, not, push it out of the way and replace it, but to do something where you can really make an impact. And it concerns me that, some of the comments I've seen recently, letters, in the newspaper, whatnot, that, well, let's raise the maximum tax and then figure out what to do with it. You've had no real needs assessment yet. I know there's been a general study that, got this committee so that the voters did vote on it, but I think you need to do to establish, credibility and the fact that long-term this is going to make a difference. Spend the time now to assess what is needed and then figure out what you can raise. I mean, there's going to be no problem spending whatever you raise, but let's target it and let's take the time to make sure it really can do some good, that you can justify we've done good and not just thrown money at it. I think the temptation would be great if all the money is sitting there in a pot and then you figure out what to do, but I don't think that's the way the law was set up. You need to assess, figure out the best way to spend it, and then justify to the citizens that this is something we really can do to help the kids, and everybody's for helping kids, but let's do it that way. Let's figure out what we need, target it. Don't just raise the money and figure out then, okay, what are we going to do with all this money that we've gotten? So I would just urge your consideration in that regard. I mean, taxes, every expense is going up, so people start to be concerned. And I think this is an important area. We really need to show that you're looking after the public dollar and are going to do really good with it, which I know everybody up here wants to do. So just want to throw in my 3 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers?
Yes, Mr. Barney Bishop.
Mr. Bishop, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Barney Bishop. I live at 2215 Thomasville Road, Tallahassee. I want to tell you first, that don't put the cart before the horse. I applaud all of you for either volunteering or being appointed by the statute to serve on this. I think all of you know that I was not in favor of it. I lost an election fair and square. So now you guys are in charge of going and moving the ball forward. I'm prepared to help you in that regard. I've got 3 suggestions for you. Number 1, do the most important thing that you have to do, and that is undertake a needs assessment. That was called for by the steering committee. It's required by the statute. As Terry just indicated to you, you should concentrate in 2 areas, making sure there's no duplication of effort, and number 2, make sure that there are no gaps. And number 3, of course, make sure you spend the money appropriately according to what the statute says. That's going to probably cost you somewhere between $250,000 to $350,000. Similar one done by Orange County, although they didn't accept ultimately a Children's Services Council. Nevertheless, their comprehensive needs assessment was very, very impressive. And as a part of that, please involve FAMU and FSU. They both have schools of social work. They're outstanding. Maybe we might even keep a graduate or 2 staying in the community to help make sure that the things that they recommend get actually done. Second, create a budget, but create a budget not based on how much money you can tax, but on how much money you can spend smartly in the first year. That's probably about $700,000. That's probably about $200,000 to $350,000 for a needs assessment. It's about $200,000 to $350,000 for your operations for a year. It makes no sense to tax to your maximum $10 million because even the steering committee said you're not going to spend the money until sometime in the 2nd year, and they only recommended spending 20%. So why impose a tax on homeowners and business owners, especially small business owners in this community, which hasn't fully recovered from the pandemic yet? Why impose on them that maximum tax? Tax just as much as you can possibly spend smartly, and then come back in your 2nd year and start ramping up so that your taxes go up as you have programs to implement and you know exactly where you want to be. And then 3rd, create a budget that's going to make sense. And there's going to be a lot of tugging and pulling on you. What's the needs assessment should be your guidebook in doing what needs to be done. And there's a lot of people that can do that. But creating a needs assessment and a budget are the 2 most important things that you want to do in order to give yourself credibility with people like me and others, some of whom are in this room today that didn't vote for you, and certainly for the majority of people that did vote for this concept. They did want this, but they want it done in a right fashion. They want it done in a way that makes sense, where you're going to have outcomes, where you're going to track those outcomes. And if you don't do that, then you're missing every lesson that we've learned in the state of Florida. I've spent 29 years representing not-for-profits in behavioral health care, juvenile justice, substance abuse, mental health, and adult corrections at the state level, not at the local level. And we're required to track our outcomes on a monthly basis in order to get paid. You shouldn't be paying anybody until they've already provided the services. And once their contract says what their outcomes that they should meet every single solitary month. If somebody doesn't meet those outcomes, then you give them a probationary period. But it's important, if you remember the very first meeting of the steering committee, the woman was here from the West Palm Beach CSC. She said that it was important to cut off those people that are not doing their job, but give them time to try to do their job. But if they don't let that go beyond it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations again, Don.
Thank you so much. Any other public comment?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Joel Thornton.
Mr. Thornton, whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. I'm Joel Thornton, 1825 Eastern Forest Drive. I have 3 children. I just want to make a comment about adding to property taxes.
I think everybody can agree, if you look at the economic situation in America today, the CPI rate is 4.2%, and that's the official government, which doesn't include housing. Housing is probably running around 10%. So you're taxing an asset that is ramping up in price due to inflation, which is beyond our control, but just as a citizen. We're getting compensated in our jobs with dollar bills that, because of inflation, are being worth less and less and less. So we're being put in a spot where we're getting squeezed. Now, I just want you to understand that when you raise property taxes, you're raising on the homes of people. That's where they live. That's their security. You know, if you raise it on their businesses or some corporation or some asset that they're going to buy, that's fine. But when you raise it on their home, that's where they live. That's where they raise their family. So don't take that lightly, please. And I hope someday we get to the point where we decide enough's enough on property taxes. No more. Let people live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Any other public comment?
Mr. Carl Monson.
Mr. Monson, whenever you're ready. Take your time.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Carl Munson. I live at 2868 Fitzpatrick Drive in Tallahassee. And we've been in that address for 33 years, and we moved here in 1980. Everyone preceding me has spoken of some very good ideas and good thoughts, so I'm going to change what I had in mind. Beware of the law of unintended consequences. Some of you might remember President Johnson, his war on the Great Society, and he planned to throw enough money at it that nobody would be poor. We still have the poor with us. One of the things that they did initially was to say, we're going to support families, but if the father and the mother were not married and that father lived in the home, they did not get the benefits. The lesson was the dads moved out, had more children with other ladies, and increased a lot of problems. Be careful of unintended consequences in how you spend the money, where you're directing the money. There's no doubt in anyone's mind here that our taxes, income taxes to the federal government, are going to go up. We see that in every announcement that comes out of Washington. The money supply for not going to taxes is going to get less. We're in for a lot of trouble in the next few years. One clash against another. Just be careful. Just be careful. In preparing to come to this meeting, I looked at the state of Florida to see how many different agencies and bureaus they had. Found two different answers, and one of them still listed, we have Governor Rick Scott as our governor. So be careful of what you do and how you advertise yourself and what you go about your business. Looking after kids is a full-time job, isn't it? Yep, I've got a granddaughter that's going to be a senior in Lincoln next year. She's doing well, and thank you. It's going to be a struggle for you to figure out how to spend the money. I don't envy you. But be careful with it. God bless you.
Thank you so much, sir. Any other public comment?
Mr. Rick Lockenbach.
Mr. Lockenbach, you have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon, council members. In 2019, my wife and I went to the fair. We parked near the fair. I learned the next day that right around the corner from where we had parked, two young guys, 16 and 19, had been gunned down. They were walking from the fair to meet one of their mothers. It brought this violence, youth violence thing home to me. And I believe that we must do something to deal with that. We must commit to be as aggressive as possible in addressing this. That means kids have to be ready when they start school. It means they have to have the kind of support they need to be successful in school. It means that they need to stay in school, complete. We want them to be able to have productive lives. So kids need supports along the way. Otherwise, we'll continue to have results like those, the 16-year-old, the 19-year-old, and so many others that have lost their lives or had their lives ruined because they've ended up in the DJJ system or in prison or in our jails. From 1998 to present, there were an average of 861 juveniles that were arrested each year during that period of time. I agree with some of what I've heard from others. It would not be prudent to levy the full $500,000 and spend those dollars in year one. But these funds are desperately needed. There's so many things that we need to be doing in order to do better by our children. And just to make it clear that every council member and everyone in this audience understands, it would not be prudent to spend all those dollars in year one. It's not reasonable to think that you can do that. But you can spend those dollars in the out years, and that's what you need to do. I suggest to you that you should levy the full $500,000 and do what you need to do for our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Other comment?
Mr. Darrell Jones.
Mr. Jones is recognized. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Darrell Jones. I live at 324 Chastain Lane, and I am the vice chair of the Leon County School Board representing District 3. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, the Superintendent of Public Schools, the best superintendent in the state of Florida, I say, Mr. Rocky Hanna, my colleague, Ms. Alva Strickland, and I'd also like to acknowledge the best principal in Leon County Schools from the heart of District 3, Ms. Carmen Connor from the Pineview Elementary School, and so many of the rest of you who are friends and colleagues, Commissioner Cummings, Mark O'Brien, whose board I also serve on. I come to you because I am not new to this conversation. I witnessed what I know was more than 18 months of arduous study done by the inaugural group that included Judge Sorstrom, Superintendent Hanna, School Board Member Strickland, and during that time they had an opportunity to take inventory of what they know are the compelling needs. That's why we were able to come up with the ballot language that we use and be able to put the emphasis on those areas of concern that we realize were going to be the most important and most compelling opportunities for us to remedy what we knew was a paucity of services being made available to our children. The fact that we put that emphasis where we would put it in the ballot language and then subsequently offer for our consideration as voters the $500,000 opportunity for us to levy on behalf of this Children's Services Council. Now, I notice, because I have been intimately involved with this conversation for some time, I see some of the same voices who have now reappeared as you now begin your work. May I remind you that this Children's Services Council came to you with an overwhelming amount of support from our local community, authorizing you to do the work to change the quality of the lives of our children in this community. We already know, if you were to ask Ms. Carmen Connor, a principal at a Title I school, they could already identify the needs that we have in our schools. She realizes the children who come in who are woefully unprepared to meet the opportunity of kindergarten classroom instruction. Our superintendent can tell you about the Great Society as well and the important impact that we wanted Head Start to have. But then there's a gap from Head Start to pre-K where our children are being left to their own devices and are not being adequately prepared for kindergarten instruction. Here now we have the opportunity, particularly with the expertise found on this Children's Services Council, to be able to respond to what we know are those enormous disparities that stand between us as a community, creating lifelong learners. I ask you to take the fullness of your authority and then coupled with what I know is your own sense of fairness and accountability as stewards of the public trust to make the types of decisions, both short-term and long-term, that will have the types of effects that we know we'll be able to see demonstrative changes in the quality of our children's learning experiences such that we can mitigate issues relative to crime and juvenile justice, because they will see learning as a viable option for them for which they are thoroughly prepared. One last thing I'd like to also add for you to consider. I have said when I spoke to you last month about the importance of capturing the ingenuity and the intellectual capital found in our community, I talked about Florida A&M University and Florida State University and Flagler College, all of whom have school colleges of education. But then there's also the issue of career and technical education, which I believe is an enormous salvo for us solving the problems that we have for our children. If we were to put our money, I say this all the time, if you want to know a community's values, look at their checkbook. If you look at our checkbook and we put the types of monies into career and technical education as early as elementary school, where Ms. Carmen Connor is already teaching small children coding, and we continue to make that worthwhile investment, we'll then have a prepared workforce to meet the opportunities found in this community as well. So I don't think you, as my grandmother would say, you don't need to leave no money on the table. Harness the full $500,000, then measure how you use that money most judiciously over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm certain that with your leadership and with your stewardship, we'll have the type of community that this Children's Services and Council is intended to have. Thank you.
Mr. Jack Levine.
Thank you, Your Honor. My message is one of gratitude. I'm grateful for the voters' action in November, and I'm grateful for your leadership to agree to this arduous task of making critical decisions for our children. So to each of you who I've met personally, and for the rest I will meet with you expeditiously, my message is one of thank you, because the job is difficult. What I'm going to ask you to do is follow the research. Recognize that we have ample supply of research that needs to be gleaned, translated, and put into action as to what works for our children. 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we did not have this amount of phenomenal research about brain development. We did not have this much research about youth attitudes towards their community, and we did not have this much research about the importance of parental involvement that we do now. We kind of called it common sense, but now it's been studied. So I would ask you to assiduously, in your needs assessment, look very carefully, comprehensively at the research. I'll also ask you to not turn away from opportunity. Sometimes there are going to be emergencies, folks. These are emergencies that sometimes are weather-related. These are emergencies that have to do with things that we can control. We've just been through, and not quite through yet, a medical emergency for our nation and world. So I think a reserve, a healthy reserve, is a very, very wise thing to do, just as families do. I'm not here to suggest what percentage should be in reserve, but I think as we proceed with our studies and our very comprehensive needs assessment, that starting with a healthy reserve is a smart way to behave and a smart way to make decisions. And finally, I will just say this, and this is from my heart, everything else is too, but do not miss the opportunity to recruit time philanthropists. That's my word for volunteers. We have 70,000 Leon Countyans under age 20, and we have 70,000 Leon Countyans over age 50. It's symmetrical. Let's not miss the opportunity to have we who are over age 50, and I am considerably over age 50, to give our time and our talent, just like Guardian Ad Litem does, just like many other organizations do. But I think we could really make our mark by looking at not only what money we can assess, but what time we can use and is an incentive for grants. I will speak to you at more length when we have more time, but please don't miss the opportunity for time investments. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Other comments?
No, Your Honor, that's the last presenter.
Very well. Thank you all so much for being here and for participating. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. Thank you for participating in the conversation that we need to have about the community. I appreciate it very, very much. Interim Administrator Report. Mr. Granger, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just hit this will be my first report, so I will just hit the high points rather than bury you in the minutia of my minute-by-minute life over the last couple of weeks since the last board meeting. Among others, I solicited proposals from more than a dozen attorneys and CPAs in the county. We're in a dire need of having legal representation, a general counsel, and also a CPA to review the budgets that we're attempting to put together right now. I have come to, after negotiating with the final two that I've selected, I'll be offering them for your approval later on in the agenda. We've been working diligently on the budgets, working with various options depending on the millage rate that you all select. Treasurer Mitchell and I spent 3 hours last week sitting down, mulling over these, and we will have some good options for you when you meet next week based on the decisions that you make today. I drafted the interlocal agreement that is now before the county for their consideration regarding the $400,000 loan that will be comprised of funds that will be built into the first budget that you'll consider next week. The second one being the fiscal year budget that will be funded by the millage. I'm also narrowing in on insurance, directors and officers insurance, general liability insurance, and workers' comp for potential employees, the others for y'all. And also later in the meeting, you'll be deciding on signatories for a bank account. Each of them has to have a security bond, and we will have that ready to go. So once we establish a bank account this coming week, we'll have the signatories and be ready to go in terms of funding the operation. We now have a standalone website URL for our website as we transition away from the county. A Facebook page, a Twitter account, and an Instagram account, all which are ready to be populated. And I spent some time with some commercial real estate folks to try to secure or explore securing office space. But it turns out, given our initial funding from the county, as much as needs to be done, including the needs assessment, that Treasurer Mitchell and I have decided that we should not have office space, use that money for office space during the next several months, use that money for the purposes of the council. And so myself and whatever additional staff we have will be working from home and meeting in conference rooms throughout the city when we need to meet on a daily or weekly basis. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much. Discussions or questions?
If I could offer to Mr. Granger, I mentioned it during our budget meeting that we have space at Leonard Wesson. I believe Brooke Bruner, Director of Early Childhood Education, has reached out to you. You're more than welcome to some of that space in conference rooms. And also to the group moving forward.
Yeah.
No rent, no utilities, so we're saving, dollars that can go back into programs.
Thank you. I left a message for Brooke earlier today, but I'll give her a buzz back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Any other comments or questions for the interim administrator at this time? Seeing no takers.
Judge, quick question.
Not so quick, Mr. Socks.
Sorry, way down the end. Ted, we had a discussion about legal support, and I heard you also mention CPA. I know that under state law, attorney services can be exempted from competitive procurement, so that's not a particular issue, but other financial support services and things would have to be bid out if they're over 35 grand. So I just want to make sure we're following 287 and the compliance requirements associated with any procurements that you might be doing.
Yes, I ran that by our general counsel, and he said that we're in compliance with the hiring of a CPA. He said that we are exempt. However, if you're raising this and with the statutory site, I will go back to him to make sure and come back to you all on your meeting at the 22nd.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I'm hearing a different opinion in Escambia, so it's just good to check.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Ted, so the Florida statute used to exempt both accounting and legal services. I think Mr. Socks is right. I'm certain that legal services are exempt. They may have changed within the last so many years, accounting services. But Mr. Socks is also correct. There is there's a dollar amount under which they are exempt. So when you're looking at it, look at both. Because, well, let's hope we're not spending a lot of money on accounting services. Just, heck, I can do it, most of it, on a piece of paper.
Thank you. Yes, it would be good to have a general counsel on board.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, just for clarification, have we identified a general counsel?
Yes, I'm going to ask for your.
You get into that?
Consideration of that.
Oh, okay.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions for interim administrator Granger? Very good. Seeing no takers. So the next one is parliamentarian discussion. I think this might be a gentle criticism of the way I run meetings, which is I'm a good consensus builder, but I'm not very authoritarian, I guess. I'm good at running a courtroom. I'm not particularly experienced at running meetings, and so I was hoping that we would consider somebody to rule on that and that help me with things like Robert's Rules of Order and things that are less familiar to me. One of the things that that bothered me about the way I ran a couple of our last meetings was coming up with good ideas and voting on them instantaneously, which I don't think is maybe such a good thing to ask our council members to do. And maybe if I had a parliamentarian, maybe that parliamentarian would say, well, how we paved the road to good intentions. So what I was thinking about was, Commissioner Cummings being a county commissioner and all, and being a person who is authoritative, might be a good person for us to think about as being a parliamentarian. Now, I don't want us to decide on this because I learned that lesson the last time. We're not going to propose something and do it today. But I wanted to raise the potential of a parliamentarian. In some of our meetings, when we're having a robust discussion and there's and there's a diversity and a divergence of opinion, and we're strong people who have strong opinions, forceful opinions, that it might be useful to have somebody to impose a little bit of order. And that's kind of what I think of as a parliamentarian. So that's why I asked Mr. Granger, I thought we would put this on the meeting for discussion. So that's the parliamentarian discussion. Anybody want to talk about that idea? Anybody have any reactions to it? If, with your permission, I plan to put it on the agenda to hopefully draft Commissioner Cummings against her will for this additional responsibility.
Judge Sistrom, if I may respond, members of the council, I would be honored to serve as parliamentarian. I do know a little about Robert's Rules of Order, but I would certainly refreshen my knowledge on Robert's Rules of Order, and I would be honored to serve this council as a parliamentarian.
Excellent.
And we don't have to decide today, because I need to have time to brush up on the rules,
Excellent.
but I would be honored to.
Well, feel free to yell at me today if the need arises.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right, so we'll put that on for a vote next time. Next up, like a good showman, Mr. Granger only told us the possibility of this discussion, and now we're going to have this discussion of contract services for legal and accounting services. Mr. Granger, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we will hold off on the discussion for CPA until the next meeting. With regard to general counsel, I've again spoken to a number of attorneys around the county. It seemed to me that we need to get up and running and need a lot of legal counsel, especially during the startup phase, which is normal. And so I really focused in on attorneys who are certified by the Florida Bar in city, county, and local government law. After contacting those in that practice in the county and inquiring and asking for proposals, I determined based on cost, and we will likely have about $50,000 in the proposed budget to cover legal costs. We anticipate it as a general rule, it may be closer to 35 or so, but because of the startup issues and the multitude of questions we have regarding legal issues as we get going and trim issues and special district issues, we anticipate that it will be a little bit more in this first year. So the lowest proposal with the greatest experience is an attorney by the name of Chris Rowe, who is a shareholder in Bryant, Miller and Olive's Tallahassee office. He's board certified by the Florida Bar in city, county, and local government law. He devotes his practice exclusively to state and local government matters and has expertise in special district establishment and governance, sunshine laws and ethics laws, and he has additional practice areas in state and local government, labor and employment, public-private partnership in government, and procurement. So I would ask the council to approve my retention of him, the council's retention of him as general counsel.
All right. Any comments, questions, or discussions regarding legal counsel? Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, Mr. Granger, I just have a couple of questions. How many firms did you scrutinize, and did you, in your final analysis, recommend Mr. Rowe based on his experience and based on his hourly rate, or was that a concern?
Experience actually was my primary concern, given where we are, but hourly rate is obviously key. We had the highest proposal that came in was almost double his proposal, which is about $250 an hour, and that's for as a partner and for others in the firm a lower hourly rate. So I guess both of them were the focus.
Okay. And just one follow-up question, Judge Sistrom. And how many years' experience does he have in city and local government?
I believe 15.
15?
Mr. Socks, you're recognized.
Yes, sir. Ted, you mentioned the experience in special district establishment and procurement. Can you give us any details, like how many special districts or what types of procurements?
I can't off the top of my head. He did help to create a special taxing district. It was not a children's services council. It may have been a water management district, but I can't swear to that. Sorry.
Any other questions, comments? Any other questions, comments?
Yes.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe. How many firms did you look at, and were any of those firms minority firms?
Yes, I looked at about a dozen firms and was referred, am particularly interested because this council has said on a number of occasions that this council should reflect the diversity of the community. And I believe that the staff and contract providers that the council retains and hires should reflect that diversity, as you all have stated. I checked about a dozen attorneys and law firms. I talked with a couple of principals from the Big Bend Chamber. I've got some notes here. With the Big Bend Minority Chamber, and a couple, one of the person who's been assisting me on a volunteer basis with as executive assistant also checked with some. I checked with the Chamber of Commerce, and I did internet searches. I was referred to 4 minority attorneys, but none of whom were either certified by the Florida Bar and Local Government or had experience with this size of an organization.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, and I don't know Mr. Rowe, but I'm sure he's very competent. I thought, is that me? Here's my thought. My thought on all of this, and some of the public speakers made this point. We're brand new at this. We're just getting our sea legs. But because we're just getting our sea legs, we're probably also, am I saying Siri? Is that what's happening, Jack? We're going to have to make some decisions that Mr. Rowe may not ultimately be our general counsel, but we're going to have to take a chance. And so I want to make 2 points. One, I'm willing to take a chance based on Mr. Granger's efforts to find the best person at the best price. The second thing is, I don't know if Mr. Rowe is in the room, and if he's not, I hope he's listening. This money, whatever amount it is, I take personally. I take personally because I have neighbors who are putting money into this. I will scrutinize his billing like no other. I promise you, if I see overspending and charging partner rates when associates could have done the research, I will bring it to the attention of the board at the following meeting. The nice thing about legal services is, no, we don't have to procure them in a competitive way. I'm glad that Mr. Granger did, but just as fast as we procure them, we can fire them. So with that said, I'm going to make the motion that we go with your recommendation, Mr. Granger, and I am looking forward to having someone who can give us legal advice, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel a little lost. I have questions that I want a definitive answer to, and I, up to this point, have not been able to find those. So with that,
I'll second that motion. I don't know Mr. Rowe, but I know Bryant Miller Olive is a very reputable firm, assuming that they have vetted their associates, their partners. I am also willing to take a chance on them. So with that, I will second that motion.
Moved by Mr. Mitchell, seconded by Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to need to abstain from this vote and possibly move up my announcement because of that. My husband is a partner at Bryant Miller Olive. And for the perception of any conflict, I need to recuse myself from this vote. Further, I do need to resign from the council for dual reasons. I've accepted a new position that's going to require a lot of my time and a lot of travel. This was very unexpected, and I did not know we were going to have this vote today, but I cannot vote in good conscience on this item. Commissioner Cummings, I will share with you that Bryant Miller Olive has a minority managing partner. She is the lead managing partner in Cumming. She is an African-American female. Bryant Miller Olive has been around for many years. They're not individually owned. They are owned by shareholders, but I would hope that that would hold some water. So I would seek also, Commissioner Cummings, your parliamentary, we're going to need that now, if I need to excuse myself from the rest of the meeting. This does not come lightly. As most of you know, I served on the Planning Council and very intimately involved in the Children's Service Council as CEO of a nonprofit here in town who serves youth at risk. But a week ago was offered a position with the FSU College of Law to be the director of their business law programs. And I'm extremely excited about the opportunity, but it did create a conflict along with this announcement is confirmation that I need to resign from the council. That said, we did have a discussion last night at the school board. This leaves a vacancy for a school board member to assume this role. And we did have this discussion last night, and we'll be making a final decision tonight on who will be my replacement. So I would look to your guidance at this time if I need to excuse myself from the rest of the meeting. And my apologies to the council itself.
So what would you say the following thing? First of all, congratulations on your
Thank you.
For all the discussions had with this and all the work that we've done together.
Thank you.
That being said, Mr. Stocks has a thought.
Yes, Judge, just for discussion purposes, and it might help answer the question as well. Just like Mr. Granger's resume, I wish we could share the resume of this proposed attorney with the board and let us look at it and review it prior to our vote and have the vote in a next meeting. It might save the idea of having to not vote if we don't vote. So I would ask in discussion if we could pull back the motion for the sake of a week to be able to look at the resume.
You can find that online. You can look at their website. I'm reviewing it now, so.
Yeah, I didn't know the name till just now,
Yeah.
so.
Before we do that, is it okay with you, Mr. Stocks? This is probably out of parliamentary order. If Mr. Granger just responds about whether between now and the 22nd causes any problem with not having the lawyer retained.
No, I don't think so.
So, Mr. Nixon?
I'd be happy to withdraw my motion and yeah, I'm perfectly happy withdrawing my motion. And Ms. Triplin, it makes it easier for you to stay for the rest of the meeting.
I am happy to do that.
So for the next agenda, we'll approve, Chris, we'll have on the agenda request to approve Mr. Rowe as counsel, and hopefully also approve the accounting firm. Is that the idea for the next meeting?
Depending on procurement issues that we need to deal with.
Okay, so that brings us to agenda item 10, which is CSC budget discussion. And based on the statutory exemption that I have, Principal Cotter, I think you should come and take the chair and we'll swap places. Is that okay with you? You physically move
I
places?
actually can see better.
You can see better right where you are. In that case, I will stay here.
Okay.
I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion of the budget and military in deference to the statutory instruction. Whenever you're ready.
Well, this is the second time that we've come to this portion of the discussion. And this time around, we have a treasurer who will now provide us with some guidance so that we can come up with an ultimate decision. But this time around, so that everyone can be heard, we're going to take 2 minutes, well, I'll ask that our committee take 2 minutes to give us a brief summary of where you stand on requesting the full half meal or going for a smaller amount. So keeping that in mind, keep the time in mind, and then we're going to start with Mr. Socks, and we'll make our way around.
I was not on the budget committee. You're asking for a briefing for the budget committee?
No, I'm asking for you to share your position on whether or not you're in support of the full half meal or a smaller amount. Everyone's going to go around and share their position.
I just want to weigh in on that, Chair.
Excuse me.
I don't think that's appropriate at this
Can I-
time.
Yes, for point of parliamentarian procedures, if I can just interject. Basically, input from members on the board comes after a motion, a second, and then discussion.
Okay.
So having not a motion on the floor at this time, I think from Robert's Rules of Order and a
Okay.
parliamentarian standpoint, that's sort of inappropriate right now.
Okay, so for that reason, we can have Paul Mitchell
report,
our treasurer, to share from the budget committee, and then from that, we will then share our positions. Okay,
Sounds good.
all right.
All right, so there are a couple of points I want to make before I kind of do a breakdown. The first thing is, and Judge, to your point that you made earlier, oftentimes when we are part of a board like this, we feel pressure to vote on things that we are not necessarily prepared to vote on. Information comes in and a quick decision has to be made, and it's like, wait, we don't have to make that decision today. Mr. Jackson, this may please you because it will mean that the meeting will be not just properly noticed, but with the right date and the right day. So everybody ends up winning on this one. I want to make sure that all 10 of us are as prepared to vote on this item as I am. I feel like, okay, the echo stopped. As we are, as the members of the budget committee are, and really, I may even have an advantage over the other 3 members of the committee because Mr. Granger and I spent, as he mentioned, a little more than 3 hours kind of going through this. So I want to say that. The other thing is that the judge has scheduled a meeting for June 22nd. And so it is going to be my recommendation that we wait until June 22nd to deal with the proposed budget that we'll be submitting to Leon. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really not a matter of setting the millage necessarily, although in the budget committee, we mentioned this. This is chicken and egg. It doesn't really matter. We know what the millage rate can be, the max. We also know what the minimum is. So none of us are making decisions without being aware of what the millage is and what the max we can assess. I do think it's important that, and I'll mention it, how much money is generated based on certain millage rates. So you can kind of keep that in mind as we are building a budget and whether or not the needs are met based on the millage rate that you may or may not support. So those are the 2 things to lead up to building this budget. And here's how this is how I approached it. I approached it in essentially 4 buckets. The first bucket is, think of it as administrative costs. It's Mr. Granger's wildly expensive salary. say that as a joke because I think we got a good deal. So it's any administrative costs associated with salaries or contract employees like Mr. Granger. The second piece that goes in that first bucket is a needs assessment. That needs assessment, as I mentioned in the budget committee, I think it was Mr. Bishop that had said somewhere between 250 and 350,000. I represent a client who does this work, will not be bidding on it. So please, I won't have to recuse myself from anything. They will not be bidding. But I did go to them and say, it's a global firm. They're really good at what they do. Tell me, one, how long is this needs assessment going to take? And two, what's a good one going to cost? And the number that I would, based on their input, the fair number is probably around as little as 200,000, as much as 300,000. If you want a thorough review, it's going to be on the 300,000 side. That also goes in that first bucket. And I think that regardless of what side of the millage rate issue you're on, that's important. I think that's important to all of us that we get that right. We really understand what the needs are, how they're being met, and an inventory of the services that are being provided. So that's the first bucket, all administrative in nature. The second budget is a reserve fund that is required. Now, I've been the chief of staff to 3 different state agencies, and that's a requirement in state law that you come up with a reserve based on how the legislature appropriates funds. There are some agencies that don't have much of a reserve fund. Mr. Granger had offered up in, I think, 2 meetings ago, 5%. 5% seems like a fairly reasonable amount. It could go a little bit lower. But because this is our first year, and because we really don't know what to expect, and this whole thing is a little bit awkward without any history of a budget, I think 5% is a fair number. That 5% bucket, the bucket number 2, I would suggest that we base that on 5% of the total millage rate. That is not to suggest that I am recommending or supporting the full millage rate be assessed and collected, but that 5%, our reserve fund, should be based on the full millage rate. But again, that's a decision for each one of you to make between now, no rush. You have a whole week to think about that. The third number, this is the Mr. Sox number. Again, having been a chief of staff, I was never a budget director of an agency, and I relied heavily on really smart people to make me look smart. Mr. Sox made a recommendation at our last board meeting that I thought was brilliant. I really did, and it was thinking way ahead of schedule. And that is the county's fiscal year. It'll take me a little while to get used to a county fiscal year, begins on October 1st. Funds do not start flowing from property assessments until sometime in November. Mr. Sox, I think appropriately suggested that this council will, for the 10 years that we've been created by the voters, will always be playing catch up on that essentially 13th month. So it's my suggestion that, that we establish the 13-month fund. I'm just calling it that because I don't know what else to call it. But it will always, by assessing it one time in our first year, we will never have to worry about the month of October when we're trying to fund programs but not be able to collect the funds to pay for those programs. So that's the third bucket. The fourth bucket, which seemingly is why everyone is here today in hot, humid Tallahassee weather, the fourth bucket is after we've done our needs assessment as required by statute, and after this body sets its priorities, what programs do we want to fund? And how much do we want to budget in our first year for funding those programs? That, I think, to Ms. Connor's point, is why she would like to hear input from this council. In meeting with Mr. Granger, I kept mentioning, I'm one vote. I cannot speak for the other, nine council members. So I'm not going to, but I will share with you a couple of things. And that is the millage rate and what funds it might generate. Most of what Mr. Granger and I did for those 3 hours, besides throwing numbers on a piece of paper, scratching them out, was to sort of look big picture. If you were to take the numbers I threw out of a $300,000 needs assessment, of 1/12 of the total millage rate, which would accomplish Mr. Sock's 13-month issue. If you look at the millage rate that would be generated, 0.5 is, if these numbers are correct, 9.3 million. It's somewhere in that ballpark. So start adding this up. A 5% reserve of 9.3 is 4.65, so 465,000. Okay, you've checked my math, but it's somewhere really close. If you think of the 13th month, take 1/12 of the 9.3 million, and you come up with 800,000 would be 9.6 million. So it's probably a little shy of 800,000. So now we are at about 1.2 million. We have a needs assessment of 300. That's 1.5 million. We have some contract services of legal, accounting eventually, and executive direction services. And you're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2 million, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on whether Alva can do a good job of convincing the folks at BMO to charge us less, not more. Yeah, I'll give you my baseball bat and you can bring it home with you.
She doesn't need a bat.
So I think you're right, Mr. Superintendent. So with that in mind, know that 0.1 mils generates 1.96 million. I consider myself a good fiscal conservative. I want to make sure that we raise enough to pay for the needs assessment and the other needs that I've mentioned. The nice thing is I can't remember which speaker it was, but spoke to emergency. It may have been Mr. Jones, but emergencies that arise. There's no requirement. We're not putting these into categories. We are generating funds that can be used if an emergency arises. So I don't think that the 0.1 is enough, but that's $1.9 million. Again, 0.5 is 9.3 million. If you thought about we're about to spend $2 million for our first 16 months of operation, because remember we fall in the middle of a fiscal year right now. So to get us through September 30th, and then to get us through next September 30th, what does that look like? So somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million. If you want to spend or you want to collect $7.3 million, then you're going to be at the high end of the full millage rate. I don't know if we shared with everyone what the actual breakdown is. Happy to throw them out to you. But if you're interested, 0.25, which is kind of halfway, generates about 4.6 million, 4.655. Again, if you think of a base operating budget that includes some reserves and includes the 13-month at somewhere just north of 2 million, that gives us about 2.6 million in the event that a needs assessment is done, reported out, priorities set by the board, and then, yes.
No, keep going.
Oh,
That's
okay.
why I'll ask a question when you finish
Okay,
your line. of
so that will give you sort of a flavor. If you want to go a little bit higher, go to 0.3, 0.4. If you want to go to a little bit lower, but that gives you an idea. The final thing I'll say is, based on what Ms. Connor's request was, that everybody sort of give us a flavor, Mr. Granger and I can go back and actually put an exact number or pretty close to an exact number on a piece of paper. And I think it will make it. Are they sharpening the pencil?
I think that's the school of dentistry.
Okay. Yes. That's one. That's one hell of a filling. But it will give everyone a sense of what they're voting for. So with that, I will shut up and.
Mr. Mitchell, I have one question. Actually, it goes back to your questioning of your friend who was involved in doing needs assessments. There were two questions you asked. One was the cost. Then there was the timing. In order to complete a comprehensive assessment, a needs assessment, what timing did that individual give?
Good question. The short term, and a lot of this is going to be dictated by how deep do you want to go, which would make it a more expensive assessment. If they literally threw all resources on it, they thought the fastest they could do it, and they did use the word overly ambitious, was 90 days. The long term was 180 days. Both of those numbers, you sort of kind of walk through it, you're probably somewhere in between. The feeling I got from them, based on, again, questions are answered based on how the question is asked. I asked, so that everybody at this table knows, for a deep needs assessment. I really want to know. And somebody had mentioned Whole Child Leon earlier. I love Whole Child Leon. I sat on the board for 4 years. I love what they do. That's not a needs assessment. That's not even close to a needs assessment. That is a bunch of really good people. I think I just paid myself a compliment. But a bunch of good people other than me who put together an anecdotal overview of the county. We really need a deep dive. So that's how I asked the question, which is why I think I got the answer.
So that's a great answer. And I would agree that we need I would prefer a very comprehensive assessment to get a full understanding of what our needs are and how best to direct our resources. Spending the full millage, if we want to, that's not going to be hard. It's spending it correctly that's going to be hard. With that said, the timing to do a full comprehensive study and then for us to digest it is going to take some time, but there's going to be, it appears that there will be a gap from the time they finish and we digest it to the next financial pickup. So as you and Mr. Granger think about this through next Tuesday, I would like for you to consider programmatically what we think we would want to do in that interim period. How much do we think programmatically we want to engage in spending? I think we don't want to wait a whole year to start picking up program activities. I don't think we should throw money out there just to be thrown out there, but I don't think we should have to wait for 6 months twiddling our thumbs. So just a consideration as y'all think through a recommendation between now and next Tuesday.
And Mr. Chair, I'm.
Principal Vice Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a force of habit. What the Budget Committee is going to bring back, the Budget Committee, I think all four of us sort of have different views. So we're not going to come back with a recommendation. I think what Mr. O'Brien has done is, in shorter than 2 minutes, has given you his position without giving you an exact number. And that is the belief that we should, at least in the first full fiscal year, begin to look for programs that meet the gaps that are established by the needs assessment, fall into whatever priority the 10 of us set, and are ready to go during the fiscal year October 1, 2021, September 30th, 2022, recognizing that we're going to be back here or back wherever we are in June of next year, putting together another proposed budget, but this time with a little more information.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, Madam Chairman. My question is about the needs assessment. Are we at a point now where we are prepared to ask the interim director to prepare a request for proposal so that we can get it on the street, so that we can start looking forward to having a detailed needs assessment, hopefully within 3 to 6 months?
So, Madam Vice Chair, the good thing is that from the procurement process standpoint, there are a lot of qualified organizations out there who can do this. The state of Florida, through the Department of Management Services, has a state term contract where they have already vetted an enormous amount of these entities. We could do an ITN where Mr. Granger reaches out, gets that list of approved vendors who can do a needs assessment, now this body has to determine what that needs assessment is asking for. So it would have to come back to us for our approval, but he can put that on the street through an invitation to negotiate. We don't need to reinvent the wheel when the state of Florida literally just finished this. Again, you can remove one from the list, Mr. Granger, but all the others are really, they're well qualified, and I think it will make the process a little bit faster. I'm comfortable with it, but I'm one vote.
Ms. McFadden.
Should be taken into consideration. Thank you. I'm sorry. So to repeat, I think that the American Recovery Act funds being out there right now is really interesting timing. And so the needs assessment should take into consideration that those will expire in September of 2023. And what is that impact going to be? So you're looking at short and long term. So I think it's a little bit different than if we were just walking into a needs assessment, not during this time. So I think, one, I would ask for that to be incorporated into it. So I do think maybe we have to dive a little deeper into what that needs assessment looks like. And the second thing is, on a needs assessment, it's great to know the gaps, but it's even more important to know, are we going to go after the biggest gap, or are we going to go after what moves the needle the fastest on something for children? And so that's a little bit of a different type of thing, right? You're looking at what could some of those long-term longitudinal outcomes be. So it's not just about needs assessment, but it's also, and identifying the gap, but it's also about identifying where can you make the largest impact. And so I think we've got to be really thoughtful in the wording of that ITN. So this may be something we're going to dive into deeper later, but if not, I just wanted to put those 2 notes down.
Okay. Mr. Granger.
Commissioner, I hope to have for the council's consideration a draft ITN recommendation from a needs assessment committee at the July meeting, and a CEO search committee process also for the agenda.
Mr. Socks?
Yes, questions for Mr. Mitchell in the consideration of the Budget Committee. Is the tax collector fee 3% part of their budget analysis?
Oh, that's a great question. As frustrating as that was to be reminded of, yes, Mr. Granger and I have put it into the calculations.
Credit to the county. I didn't hear you enunciate that, but is that part of that big $2 million chunk?
Yes, and actually it is and it isn't. It is because it's $400,000 that the only part that isn't is the interest rate that we're paying to the county, because it's sort of the money that we're collecting anyway. So the interest rate was not put into it, but because we got, you know, an attractive, I think it was 1.5% from the county. That has been a part of the calculation.
And my other question is, in our inaugural year, I think there's a desperate need in our community for education, training, and outreach, especially for some of our smaller organizations who would want to apply for program funding. And I think in our initial year, we ought to be dedicating some of our budget to do education and outreach and grant-making skill development, so that when the competition occurs, those organizations are competent enough to apply, as opposed to the people who are used to asking for money. Is that part of the budget setup?
It is not. It is yes and no. It is certainly part of what Mr. Granger brought forward. So to Mr. Granger's credit, he was sort of thinking in your line of thinking, Mr. Socks, what isn't in that 2 million is a position that would do that, because I couldn't speak for you, so I didn't know if that's something, and that's, again, to Ms. Connor's question of all of us, if we're going to create a position like that, that will go into bucket 1. So it was considered, but it is not part of the $2 million.
It says it's on. There we go. Okay. I'd like to say this. So coming from the nonprofit side, which has been my last 6 years, I would urge the council to consider the mechanism for application and reporting while you're in this needs assessment. Most of us who apply for grant funding know that the systems for application and for reporting and for reimbursement, they vary wildly. All the way from submit this paper and all of these documents scanned, that would be our state reimbursement process, to very robust portals where information is entered digitally and they calculate it for you. So I would urge you to include that in year 1 under the needs assessment. And I don't know if your needs assessment and portal would go hand in hand. I know that United Way is probably a good example to look at in our county. They did it with, I believe North Highlands did it for them. I don't know if they did the portal or how that worked, but, you know, underwent the needs assessment, the rebuild of the portal, their application, and during that process, the buckets were created. So, you know, if it was homeless, then people who, the nonprofits that are in the homeless territory, that's what they apply for. That obviously would only apply to those that work in that homeless arena. So I think the development of that portal and including the nonprofits possibly in that conversation would really be to the benefit of the council in the long run. They'll be able to tell you what works really well, what's really efficient, and what is absolutely not efficient, and that will help everyone as the process moves along. Nonprofits, the council, the outcome reporting, all of that. So I just would urge you to consider that in that first year startup funds.
Mr. Hannah?
Love it. Feels awesome being recognized by one of my principals. It's kind of reverse order. So to address the elephant in the room, is it your recommendation as the budget committee chair that we table this discussion again now about the millage issue until the 22nd?
No, sir. In fact, just the opposite. I don't think we should vote on it today. But I do think that, I don't think it should be tabled. I think.
Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself again because I made a motion before.
Right.
and-
No.
So I'm not going to I'm not going to make a motion again today.
Right.
If in your professional opinion as director of the budget chair, you think we should wait and make a motion on the 22nd. If you're not prepared to vote, you don't think we should vote today.
Well, I'll say this. I'm probably not prepared. I could get prepared, I guess, if need be. But what I was hoping, and I think what Ms. Connor was essentially asking all of us for, is our opinions of where we want to go. For example, when Ms. McFadden mentioned, which I think is really good thinking of not just considering the federal dollars that are coming in, but with whatever consultant we hire to do this needs assessment, to maybe sit down with us and as a council and evaluate what are our priorities and help guide us through what I think is the most critical point. That will make a needs assessment more robust and probably a little bit more expensive. Mr. Sox's point of doing community outreach, that was a position that was not in that base budget, but certainly one that Mr. Granger had brought forward as a possibility. So all of those make that base budget tick up or tick down based on our input. And that's why I say, once I can give you what the base budget is, then it'll be, I think, a little bit easier for you to decide what the millage rate should be. And I with one caveat, I realize that there are some who just want to go ahead and collect it all so that we can use it in responsibly in future years. And so then it doesn't really matter other than approving the budget line item by line item.
I think I hear you saying that buckets 1, 2, and 3, give or take, are around $2 million. So the big question is, in addition to that, do we want a $7 million reserve, or do we want a $0 in reserve for potential funding programs, or do you want to meet somewhere in the middle? That's basically what you're saying. I certainly don't mind waiting until the 22nd, but what I definitely don't want to do is, if we have to advertise this and we drag this on, if we miss a deadline to go to the property appraiser and say, this is what our recommendation is, people won't forgive us for that.
Yeah, that date is actually in August. What is the pressing date right now is a proposed budget to the county, which, by the way, that's why I said we're going to be here again next year doing the exact same thing, submitting a proposed budget to the county, and the same thing at the end of June of 2023. So,
Okay, so then the proposed budget to the county is due by July 1st?
yeah, I think it's June 30th.
June 30th.
Yes, sir.
And so we're going to hold bucket 4, and on the 22nd, what you're saying is we figure out how much bucket 4 is of our budget.
Yeah, and yes, that is my hope as one vote.
No,
Mr. Is it your intention to possibly present the council with maybe 3 different scenarios to vote on?
I'm happy to do that based on kind of to the superintendent's point. If let's just say that for easy math, it's 2 million that we need as a base in the first 16 months, 17 months. What I can bring forward is $2 million, and if you want $7.3 million in reserves, you would vote 0.5. If you want 2.6 million in reserve, you would vote 0.25.
Right.
Those are, again, this is, and I say this to everyone in the room, this is the first year, so it's awkward. I don't think that there's anyone in this room who is espousing one position or another who is doing it because they love kids or hate kids more than the next person. I don't, regardless of where you
Talking about
stand.
my personal
Well, you personally, Judge, I know don't care for children, but everybody else does.
I think
So-
my
so-
intention was, I think, to share with you that sometimes as a board, as a school board, it helps us when superintendent presents us, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it's something very weighty like this, that where we really am not sure we all agree, kind of, it helps when there's three different scenarios. Superintendent presents option A, option B, option C, and I think that might help the council more efficiently come to a collective decision.
So remember and I think I can give you as many different options as 9.3 million minus 2 million. So I can give you 7.3 million options, because that's really the only thing I would tell you is that, remember, in that 2 million is what I call, the SOX plan. People might want to just start incorporating this always, but Mr. SOX's recommendation that we have that one extra month, that is based on, as is the 5% reserve, based on the full millage. So we are built into that 2 million, we're already giving ourselves a nice cushion. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm doing funny math here. I recognize that, but I feel that in that 2 million, if the outreach position that Mr. Sox had mentioned, I think we can cover that. And if it starts getting tight, we still have that 860,000, again, that's based on the full millage rate. So I've sort of erred on the side of caution for additional funds, know that into that, roughly $2 million.
And Madam Chair, I'd like to add this, and I certainly don't mind waiting until the 22nd. We can go through all this again, and Mr. Jackson will be here. Hopefully we can get the date correct, because if others want to have input, that's what makes this community and our country great. We might not always agree, and sometimes we agree to disagree. My father, I campaigned for the establishment of CSC. My dad campaigned against it, right? But I still go to his house, he still comes to my house, and we're still friends. And so at the end of the day, we may just agree to disagree, but the bottom line is, I think all of us care deeply for our community and for the children in our community and for the future of our community. So I certainly don't mind waiting until the 22nd to move forward. But at some point, we're going to have to address the elephant in the room.
Agreeing to table this. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Cummings.
On the 22nd of June, then Mr. Mitchell, the Budget Committee meets. And then after the Budget Committee meets at 12:45, then we have the full CSC meet. Now, are we anticipating having an actual budget that all the council members will have a copy of it, so we'll have something tangible, okay, that we can look at? I just want to make sure.
Yes, ma'am, and that it would be my recommendation that we don't leave until we vote on the proposed budget, because, again, it's a proposed budget that's required by the county.
Absolutely.
Right, the interim budget, but we're also including, remember, it's an interim budget, and then it's calendar year 21, 2022s as well. So we're just,
Okay, and so my follow-up, Madam Co-Chairperson, is then we present that proposed budget to the full body when we meet at 2 o'clock for discussion and adoption. I just want to make sure we're all clear.
Yes.
And in that process, we will also, at that particular meeting, agree upon the millage rate as well, or at least have that as part of the discussion and agree upon it. Am I correct? Is that what we're saying in this meeting now?
Yes, that's the way
Okay.
I understand it.
Do we
Mr.
need a
Mitchell.
motion?
But Mr. Socks wants to share first.
I just, one more item for discussion. And Mr. Mitchell, I absolutely understand why the setting reserve based on the total potential millage is sort of the right technique to know the number. one of my thoughts is that if we're going to get 3 proposal scenarios, that reserve actually be tied to 5% of those numbers. Because if it's a very small number, that reserve might be excessive if it stays at the larger amount. So I think if we present the reserve for each option, it would be better to consume than having a fixed reserve that doesn't match the totals. Does that make sense to you? And I sort of agree with the commissioner. I think we have always been speaking to the principle of once the budget is determined, the millage need is then known. So determining the millage is based on us agreeing on the budget, not the other way. So totally agree.
Right, and that's kind of this chicken and egg thing, Madam Vice Chair. It's, but by throwing dollar amounts out, I think it gives people, I mean, I'm just, again, that, to Ms. Striplin's point, having 3 options, I'll come up with 3 options, but they're sort of arbitrary. They're Paul Mitchell saying 0.5, that should definitely be one option. I guess we could do 0.1 and live within the $1.9 million means, which I certainly think is doable. And then I guess option 3, for lack of a better option, is somewhere in the middle, which is that 0.25. So if that's the will of the council, I'm happy to do that. And then Mr. Socks, I'll do the 5% reserve based on that. But I think, Ms. Connor, I'm glad you asked everybody, because now although I'm not really sure I have a full idea where everybody is, I kind of have a good idea. I know where 2 people are. I know where I am, and I know where Mr. Hannah is.
Mr. Mitchell, just one more comment. And another consideration would be we had a Alachua County presentation that was very moving, and that they could fund some summer programs in their first year. Starting at the bottom would basically mean we just were going to get rid of next summer. We were not going to have any programming next summer. I would not be thrilled with that. So I would be comfortable with the bottom being the middle, the middle being the middle, and the top being the top, so that you actually work from a platform where we are funding programs sometime next year, even though it may not be a large number, but there is a program funding potential. If not, we wouldn't need to hire a program director right away. The needs assessment would go on the back burner till we could do a comprehensive one that's due sometime next spring. We could elongate a lot of things if we're not doing summer programming. But I think the opportunity is still there to do summer programming, and I think looking at 3 options where the lowest option is in the middle is a more appetizing thing for me. I'm not speaking for the other 9, just for me.
Yeah, so what I'll do is, and it won't be, me doing these calculations in my brain, is we'll have some precise numbers for you to look at. Remember, Mr. Socks, that in that 2 million, this is really because there are people in this room who are going to scrutinize that number. In there is our 13th month built in. So that's our, it's padded. Look, you know how I feel. I think it's a great idea, but yeah, I will work with Mr. Granger, and I will try to meet everyone's needs. And I won't say here's the bottom, here's the top. It's just here's what you're going to need. And in the budget committee, we addressed, Mr. Hannah asked me this question about, I said, well, we won't need program directors if we have no programs. If we have 20 programs we're funding, we might need more than 1 program director. I don't know. I do know what their salary range is. Go over to the Department of Education, and they have program directors there. So if, again, going back to Ms. Connor's question of us all, I think I get everybody's desire here. I kind of an idea. And I'm going to come back with specific numbers, Mr. Socks, for you that that one ties the 5% reserve to exactly what that number is. But with your permission, I'm not going to do the 13th month tied to that because the 13th month, is that okay?
So do we need a motion for what we expect for the next meeting? We don't have, okay. So the expectation is that you will bring that to us at the next meeting for us to make a final vote. Yes.
And Vice Chair, I want to just also comment for everybody's benefit. When we approve a budget, whatever that looks like, I would request that that budget be as high level as it can be and not as line item specific. So we have flexibility within the budget without having to go back to a committee to get line item changes. So line item is great for detail and for review and analysis, but when we approve it, let's see how high a level we can get it to keep it flexible.
Yeah, and that's what I said, that 850,000 of that 13th month can be, the way that Mr. Granger and I have done it is, here's what the number is, and from that, if you have any questions, we can tell you where we came up with that.
Ms. McFadden?
Just to prove that I watched the trim, really fun 2-hour video. We do have to make sure on our agenda that we adopt the millage rate before the budget. That was one of my big takeaways. So that's all I wanted to share on that. The second thing I wanted to say is I love Jack Levine's comment on the power of the people that are in this room and in the community. And as I think about what we could do next year, whether or not we know about programming, it is to bring that power of those people in, and whether it is, huge mentoring initiative and tutoring initiative or whatever else that the needs assessment comes up with. That doesn't cost a lot of money, and that we should really think about that power that he brought up in the beginning today. And I just wanted to reiterate it because I think it would be a great way to show to the people of this community that it's not just about money, but it's about people, and they can be a part of this. So thank you, Jack. I thought that was a great comment.
All right, so now I get to turn it back over to you, Judge.
Yeah, so based on the discussion you have just had, I'm going to agenda a vote on the council's interim budget and the council's fiscal year 2021-22 budget for our June 22 meeting. And so we will publicly notice that, hopefully without any typographical errors, and have that for a vote on our June 22nd meeting.
Which is a Tuesday.
Are you sure? I'm not. Now you got me paranoid.
It is.
All right, June 22 is indeed a Tuesday. Excellent. All right, so the next thing we need to talk about is the trim process. Thank you to everyone who did watch the trim webinars. I watched the trim webinar myself. I may never recover. And we got to get this right. I mean, we got to get this right. Luckily, Mr. Granger is on top of it, I know. The trim for those of you who don't understand, trim is truth in millage. And it requires a series of acts by the taxing authority, which is us, and a series of notices and a series of public hearings. We're required to notify the property appraiser by July 1, when we will hold our first public hearing. The hearing must be held between September 3 and September 18. It must take place either Monday through Friday after 5 on a day that does not conflict with the school board or the county commission meetings, or anytime on a Saturday, even God rested on Sunday. We sent a doodle poll to everyone the other day, but we don't have a quorum for any of our proposed dates yet. So we're going to try again. We'll send out another doodle poll this week to everyone and announce a hearing date for our public hearings, for our trim public hearings. But we got to get that done at the June 22 meeting because we got to notify the property appraiser by July 1. So please, 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 we may have to ask some of us to rearrange our schedules in our lives so that we can get a quorum, so that we can have, satisfy the trim public hearing requirements. Next for discussion is CSC bank account signatories. So the statute says, is it the statute that says we have to have two people to sign on the bank account? And it must be either the council chair and a council member, or the council chair and the council CEO, interim administrator, I think is adequate. So for purpose of signing checks is what this boils down to. My feeling about it is the person, since it has to be the chair, my proposal is that it's Mr. Granger is the other person on the signature, because I don't think the rest of you are going to be available to sign checks, is my guess. So that's my thought. Any discussion on bank account signatories?
Do you need that as a recommendation?
Just a motion, I think.
Motion,
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second.
Any discussion, questions, objections? All right, so seeing no objections, that passes unanimously. Council Chair and Council CEO as required signatories. CSC email addresses. So there's been some discussion, as School Board Member Striplin discussed this. We have a CSC email account now. And Mr. Granger has his own CSC email account. So are there two email accounts? Is there two email accounts or one email account at this moment? One, which is Ted at CSC. All right, so we have one official CSC email account. Does anyone else want their own official CSC email account?
So it would be, if some member of the public wanted to communicate with any of us individually, it would be an email account for the council members, as opposed to it going into either our business or personal. I mean, it's the same. I would prefer that we have a separate one, because if a public records request is ever done, I would prefer just to turn them over to the CSC email and not my personal / professional.
I just have a bias generally against getting any more email. But I understand your point exactly. Anybody else have any thoughts on email accounts?
I'll just offer that I think it ought to remain optional for each member. As a government employee, I already have a government email and don't want a fourth email.
Yes.
So I have a folder for Leon County CSC. I drop it right in there. And just so everybody knows, it doesn't matter whether you get it at your CSC email or your private email or your business email, it's still protected by the Sunshine Law.
Right. Everything is public record.
So you're going to have to
Everything is
go
public
mine
record.
it wherever you put it.
So my intention is to, my personal intention is to just forward everything that I get to Mr. Granger's email account.
So are you, so is it, and I can certainly do that. So it's on our website, it is going to have, Mr. Sachs, you have this advantage because it's, then I guess I'm happy to put my work email address, which is my personal email address, on the website.
Because the other thing is too, people can send their emails to Mr. Granger, and then Mr. Granger could distribute them.
That would be
Right. It would also make it easier for the public not to have to click on 10 different email addresses if they had public comment. But in the event that it's also important that the public have the ability to communicate with us individually. I don't care.
So why don't we just leave it up to each council member individually? Is that okay with you, Mr. Granger? They'll communicate with you individually. All right, so we'll leave it up to each person individually, which In that case, no action required by me. We don't need a vote on it, I don't think. All right. Next, meetings. The next meeting is we have a budget committee meeting again at 12:45, and then the full CSC, the full council meeting at 2 p.m. And the next meeting is at the commission chambers. Is that right, Mr. Granger? Yes. So 12:45, budget committee, 2 p.m., full council at the commission chambers, budget committee members, Chair, Treasurer Mitchell, Commissioner Cummings, Superintendent Hannah, and Scherstrom as the council chair.
Mr. Chairman?
And y'all scheduled up at 12:45.
12:45, yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, and maybe you've already covered this, is it, because you're having challenges with scheduling, is it allowable to join by Zoom?
Is it allowed? I don't think so, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I know that the governor had made a special executive order permitting county commissions and other local governments to meet remotely, but I don't know that applies, how that applies to Children's Services Council. Ted, do you know?
I don't, I'll ask.
I was just thinking, given the amount of vacations and how often we're meeting, people might be willing to Zoom in if they're traveling.
It's tough. Thanks so much. Remember, that's for the public hearing, for the public to tell us what they think about our trim proposal, about our budget. Is the meetings that we're having trouble scheduling out. But we will look into, I will put on the agenda of Mr. Granger to report on whether we can have anybody participate by Zoom at the trim meetings.
I'm sorry, were you talking about just the trim meeting? You're talking about just meetings in general moving forward? Can you either call in or Zoom
I
in?
was talking about meetings in general.
Right.
So we'll look into both. We'll look into both. I don't know that the rules might be different or the same. I really don't know. Okay. All right, so for our next item on the agenda is our next meeting agenda. Besides the routine items that are on every agenda, we're going to have a vote on the parliamentarian. We're going to have a Granger report, of course, and on that report is going to be contract services that we didn't resolve today.
Dear sister.
Yes, ma'am.
After the vote on the parliamentarian, will I be allowed to just give some general comments about parliamentary procedures as
Yes.
it relates to our meeting and the process and procedures that we need to adhere to?
Yes, I wish you would, and I think that would help us on our statutory responsibility to have some ethics training too, because I think parliamentary procedure is part of ethics. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for that. Let me make a note.
Hearkening back to Commissioner Cummings' comments about an RFP, when would be the correct timing to start putting that on the agenda?
Would you say it again, Mr. Barnes?
The issue of an RFP for a comprehensive or a needs assessment?
Yeah. And I think,
Is that something that we want to assign Mr. Granger to start investigating and bringing back to us?
so he had said, Ted had said, Mr. Granger had said, I think by the July.
I hope to have gone through a needs assessment committee, which will be appointed at the next meeting.
Okay. All right, I just want to make sure that we don't lose track of that. Okay, thank you.
So we'll have a report on the status at our next meeting.
Perfect.
All right, that'll be part of Mr. Granger's report. We will approve council's interim budget. We'll approve council's fiscal year 2021-22 budget. We'll select the first trim public hearing date. Also, we have two meetings scheduled for July 8th and July 22. As you know, I hoped to cancel our June 22 meeting, and now I'm hoping to cancel our July 8th meeting right now.
Yes.
Everybody okay with us canceling the July 8th meeting? Everybody's okay with that? I don't think we need a vote on that.
Yes, that's my anniversary, Judge. I would very much appreciate.
We'd love to
I'd like to stay married second
I
time.
was planning to get you a card, but I got you a better gift, Mr. Hampton. So the
Thank you.
The July 8 meeting is canceled. We're going to have a July 22 meeting only.
Judge, a quick question. Right after the two votes on the interim budget and the operational budget, do we want to have a formal agenda item that says establish trim amount?
You know what? I think would be better for public notice, wouldn't it?
Just so it's real clear that we're doing that in that meeting?
Yes. A, B, C, establish. And that would be trim millage rate. Is that right? Is that the proper terminology, Mr. Sox?
Sounds
Establish
beautiful, sir.
trim
Yes, sir. Wonderful.
millage rate. Good, thank you. I think that's going to be better public notice.
Judge,
Yes, ma'am.
could you also add to that agenda to swear in the new school board member?
Swear in, and I was going to ask, I think we've got something in our bylaws about how we go about doing it, but I don't think it's up to us, right? It's this.
I think it's, I've never been sworn in, so maybe I've been acting out of order since the very beginning.
Oh, no, he wasn't at the,
Tiffany Baker Carper swore you in.
he wasn't at the first meeting. Wait, did we? He wasn't.
Oh, he missed the.
Yeah,
All
it's a
right.
twofer, yeah. Do them at the same time.
Exactly. Swear in new council.
Rocky is used to swearing.
Yeah, he
I thought it was ceremonial. I didn't realize.
He really did.
Yes. Not this week. Graduation ceremonies are over.
All right, so, so excellent, we will do that. And did you have anything to discuss as far as, let's see. Oh, actually, there it is right there. All right, so we have a member announcement. Ms.
I already
School
made
member
it.
has already announced it. Section 3 of the council's bylaws provide that vacancies in council memberships shall be filled as soon as practical by the appropriate appointing authority in accordance with the statute. I don't really remember how a school board member ends up getting selected from the school board, but that's up to the school board, I'm sure.
Yes,
Right.
so we
School board.
selected amongst ourselves, and that's how I got here by vote of the school board, which it is on the agenda for tonight to
Excellent.
select and officially vote on a new member, and we will do that tonight. I brought this conversation up to them last night, so we would have 24 hours for everyone to search their conscience and see if they're, ready to step up to the plate. And again, my extreme apologies to the committee for having to back out at this early date. It's bittersweet for sure.
Thank you so much. All right, so the only other item on the agenda is any other council member comments, any other council member comments or discussion?
Judge,
Mr. Sox.
I haven't had any takers yet for my opportunity to participate on the Community Alliance for Circuit 2. So the offer is still out there. Any board member who wants to be a member of our Community Alliance serving all of Circuit 2, there is a place on that board for a Children's Trust member. And the other thing I wanted to just mention that today is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So I want to make sure folks are aware of that DCF and Elder Affairs are doing some big public awareness campaigns around elder abuse awareness.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sox. So if there are no other comments, thank you so much for your service. It is a privilege to serve. We are adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Ron.
Appreciate you. Well, I'll tell you something else. I'm embarrassed. I wish I didn't make typos, but I do. And it's me. It's me. It's me. Do you know what the lawyers say? So judges are used to people blaming their secretary.
Good job.
Thank you very, very much.
I'll get with you.
Because lawyers are forever saying my secretary, you can fire your secretary, but you can't blame your secretary. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Please help me. We know this is making up for technology, so I appreciate the suggestion. Thank you, thank you. That's what we'll do, that's what we'll do. So that's why he's got. Yes, I can do it. I can do it. Let's get going. Like when we set up committees and stuff like that, in order to be able to communicate with him effectively, he's got to be on the right. That's a great suggestion. We're gonna do that.